A 9-year-old boy with a broken leg that never healed is limping through a Missouri snowstorm toward a diner full of people who will pretend he doesn't exist. His name is Jace Holloway. He hasn't spoken to another human being in 14 months. The cast on his left leg is filthy, cracked, and 4 months past due for removal. Underneath it, something is rotting. Tonight, the man who is supposed to be his guardian told someone on the phone that the boy probably won't survive the winter. And he said it like that was the plan. But Jace isn't dead yet. And the scarred biker sitting alone in the corner booth of that diner is about to become the most dangerous thing standing between a child and a shallow grave. Stay with this one all the way to the end. If this story hits you, drop a like right now, leave a comment telling me what city you're watching from, and share this with someone who needs to hear it tonight. The neon sign above Hatchet Creek Diner buzzed and flickered against the late afternoon sky like a dying pulse, casting pale red light across the frozen parking lot. Highway 54 stretched empty in both directions, the asphalt glazed with black ice, and the wind came down off the Ozark ridgeline, carrying the kind of cold that doesn't just chill skin, but bruises bone. The temperature had dropped 9 degrees in the last hour. Snow wasn't falling yet, but the clouds hung so low and heavy they seemed to press down on the diner's tin roof like a hand trying to smother something. Jace Holloway stood at the edge of the parking lot with his arms wrapped around his own ribs, shivering so violently his teeth clicked together in a rhythm he couldn't control. He was 9 years old. He weighed 53 pounds, which was 20 pounds under where a boy his age should have been. His jeans were too long and rolled at the cuffs, stiff with dried mud. His hoodie, a faded gray thing 3 sizes too large, hung off his frame like a tarp draped over a fence post. Beneath it, his skin was a map of bruises in various stages of healing. Yellow near his collarbone, purple-black along his ribs, a greenish smear across his left forearm where someone had grabbed him hard enough to leave 4 distinct fingerprints. But it was the leg that told the real story. The cast on his left leg ran from just below the knee to his ankle. It had been white once, months ago, when the emergency room doctor at Barton County General had wrapped it after what his uncle described as a fall down the porch steps. That was in August. It was now the first week of December. The cast had never been removed. No follow-up appointment had ever been scheduled. Over 4 months, the plaster had turned gray, then brown, then something closer to the color of wet concrete. Cracks ran through it like fault lines. The edges had softened and curled where moisture and sweat had rotted the material. The smell came and went, depending on the cold. On warmer days, it was unbearable. On days like this, the freeze masked it, but Jace knew what was underneath. He could feel it. A deep, grinding ache that sometimes flared into a heat so intense he bit through the inside of his cheek to keep from screaming. He hadn't seen a doctor since August. He hadn't seen a teacher since the end of 3rd grade. He hadn't seen another child in so long he sometimes forgot what their voices sounded like. 14 months. That was how long Jace had been living with his uncle Rick Mercer in a house set back from a gravel road outside Harlan, Missouri, population 1,100. 14 months since the accident that killed both his parents on Interstate 44 near Springfield. 14 months since a county social worker named Darlene Fitch signed a placement form and drove away without looking back. 14 months of silence, cold, locked doors, and the slow erosion of everything that made Jace a person instead of a problem. He limped across the parking lot toward the diner's front door. Each step sent a bolt of white pain up through his leg and into his hip. He had learned to walk on it by shifting most of his weight to the right side, dragging the left leg slightly, keeping his jaw clenched. He had learned to do a lot of things in 14 months. How to eat whatever he could find in the garage where he slept. How to fill a water bottle from the spigot on the side of the house before his uncle woke up. How to stay quiet enough that Rick forgot he existed for days at a time, which was the safest version of that house. The diner door was heavy. Jace had to use both hands to pull it open, and when the warm air hit him, it was so sudden and so foreign that his knees nearly buckled. The smell of coffee and grease and heated air came at him like a wall. His eyes watered. His hands shook. He stood in the doorway for 3 full seconds before anyone looked up. A waitress in her 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her head glanced at him from behind the counter. Her expression flickered, a brief tightening around the eyes, the kind of recognition that comes before the decision not to recognize. She looked away, picked up a coffee pot, moved to the far end of the counter. Jace stepped inside and let the door close behind him. The diner was half full. A couple in a booth near the window eating meatloaf. A man in a John Deere cap reading the Barton County Register at the counter. Two women in nursing scrubs sharing a plate of fries and talking in low voices. A truck driver hunched over a bowl of chili near the jukebox. All of them registered Jace's presence in the peripheral, instinctive way that people register things they don't want to deal with. A dirty kid. A limping kid. A kid who looked like trouble or sadness or paperwork, and none of them wanted any of those things on a Tuesday afternoon. Jace moved slowly along the row of booths looking for an empty seat. His leg trembled with every step. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, mixing with the low hum of a country song playing from somewhere behind the counter. He passed the couple. The woman glanced at him and then turned her face toward the window. He passed the nursing scrubs. One of them watched him for a moment, then leaned closer to her friend and whispered something. He passed the truck driver, who didn't look up at all. No one spoke to him. No one asked if he was okay. No one asked where his parents were. This was not unusual. This was, in fact, exactly how the world had worked for Jace Holloway for the past 14 months. Adults were not safe. Adults did not help. Adults looked away, signed forms, made phone calls, and moved on. The system had placed him with his uncle. The system had not checked on him. The school had not followed up on his withdrawal. The neighbors had not asked questions about the boy who stopped appearing in the yard. Everyone had done exactly enough to feel like they had done something, and then they had done nothing at all. Jace reached the back of the diner. There was one booth left, tucked into the far corner where the overhead light had burned out, and the wall was stained with years of cigarette smoke that predated the indoor smoking ban. A man sat alone in that booth, his back to the wall, a plate of eggs and toast in front of him, a cup of black coffee steaming beside his left hand. He was big, not fat, just wide across the shoulders and heavy through the arms in a way that suggested years of physical work or physical damage, or both. His hair was dark, cut short but uneven, like he'd done it himself with clippers. A scar ran from the corner of his left eye down to his jawline, thick and raised, the kind of scar that came from something that should have killed him. He wore a black leather jacket with a patch on the left breast, a faded insignia of a wolf skull and crossed pistons, stitched beneath 3 words, Iron Veil MC. His name was Ridge Callahan. He was 41 years old. He had served 2 tours in Afghanistan with the Marine Corps before a roadside explosion outside Helmand province sent shrapnel through his left knee, his right shoulder, and the lower half of his face. He had been medically discharged, inadequately treated, and quietly forgotten by the same system that had sent him overseas. He had spent 3 years after his discharge drifting between VA hospitals and homeless shelters before finding the Iron Veil, a motorcycle club based out of the Ozarks that operated less like an outlaw gang and more like a battered convoy of men who had been broken by the world and decided to stop breaking others. Ridge didn't look up when Jace stopped at the edge of his booth. He didn't look up for a full 5 seconds. He was cutting his eggs with the side of his fork, the way a man does when he's learned to eat with damaged hands. When he finally raised his eyes, they were gray, flat, unreadable. The eyes of someone who had stopped performing expressions for other people a long time ago. Jace stood there. He didn't speak. His hands were clenched at his sides, and his left leg trembled badly enough that the fabric of his jeans vibrated. His lips were dry, cracked. His face was pale beneath a layer of grime. Ridge looked at him. Jace looked at the empty seat across the booth. "Can I sit here?" Jace said. His voice was barely audible, raw from disuse. "Until my leg stopped shaking." Ridge didn't ask questions. He didn't smile. He didn't make a warm, reassuring face. He reached across the table with one scarred hand and pulled the opposite chair out 6 inches. Then he went back to his eggs. Jace sat down. The relief of taking weight off his left leg was so immediate and so enormous that his vision blurred. He gripped the edge of the table with both hands. His breathing came in short, shallow bursts. Not crying, not yet, just the involuntary response of a body that had been running on adrenaline and pain for so long that the absence of one felt like the collapse of the other. 47 seconds. That was how long Jace sat in that booth before his body gave out. His grip on the table loosened. His eyes rolled back slightly. His head dropped forward, and he slid sideways against the wall of the booth with a small, broken sound that was half gasp and half whimper. Ridge caught the boy's coffee mug before it hit the floor. He didn't shout. He didn't jump up. He set the mug down, leaned across the table, and pressed 2 fingers against the side of Jace's neck, checking for a pulse the way a man does when he has checked for pulses in worse places than this. The pulse was there. Fast, thready, but there. "Hey," Ridge's voice was low. Not soft. Low. A frequency that cut through noise without adding to it. "Kid, open your eyes." Jace's eyes opened. They were brown, enormous in his thin face, and so full of exhaustion that looking into them felt like staring down a well that had no bottom. "You're okay," Ridge said. He didn't say it like a comfort. He said it like a status report. "Your heart's beating, you're breathing, you're sitting up. Those are the 3 things that matter right now." The waitress appeared at the edge of the booth. She had the coffee pot in one hand and a look on her face that landed somewhere between concern and calculation. The expression of a woman trying to decide whether this situation was going to cost her something. "Is he yours?" she asked Ridge. "No." "He can't just... is he okay?" "No," Ridge said again. "He's not. Bring him whatever's hot. Soup, toast, eggs, anything. Put it on my tab." The waitress hesitated. She looked at Jace, then at Ridge, then at the other customers who had begun to turn their heads. Something shifted in the air. The thing they had been pretending not to see was now sitting in a booth in the back corner, half-conscious and shaking, and the pretending was getting harder. "Okay," the waitress said. She moved quickly back to the counter. Ridge heard her say something to the cook, her voice sharp and clipped, and then the sound of a ladle hitting a pot. Ridge turned back to Jace. "What's your name?" "Jace." "How old are you, Jace?" 9. "Where are your parents?" Jace's eyes dropped to the table. He didn't answer for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat, emptied of everything except the fact itself. "Dead." Ridge let the words sit. He didn't apologize. He didn't fill the silence with noise. He sat with it, the way a man sits with a wound that he knows cannot be sutured, only endured. "Who do you live with?" "My uncle." "Where is he?" "Home." "Does he know you're here?" Jace shook his head. "Does he know you're gone?" Jace shook his head again, slower this time, and something moved behind his eyes. A flash of fear so quick and so practiced that it had become almost invisible. Almost. Ridge had spent enough time around men who flinched at certain sounds to recognize the architecture of that fear. It wasn't the fear of getting in trouble. It was the fear of being found. The soup came. A thick bowl of chicken and rice, steaming, with a plate of white bread and butter beside it. The waitress set it down without speaking and retreated. Jace stared at it for a moment as if he didn't understand what it was. Then he picked up the spoon with both hands because his fingers were shaking too badly for one, and began eating. He ate the way people eat when they haven't eaten in days. No pausing, no tasting, just mechanical, desperate intake, the spoon moving from the bowl to his mouth and back again in a rhythm that had nothing to do with pleasure and everything to do with survival. Halfway through the bowl, he tore a piece of bread and soaked it in the broth, and ate that too. When he was done, he sat back and breathed, and for the first time since he'd entered the diner, his hands were still. Ridge watched all of this without expression. But beneath the stillness, calculations were running. The boy's weight. The tremor in his hands. The cast that should have been removed months ago. The hoodie that was clearly not his, probably grabbed from someone's donation pile or pulled from a trash bin. And the way Jace had positioned himself in the booth, back against the wall, eyes on the door, body angled toward the nearest exit. A 9-year-old sitting like a combat veteran. "Jace?" Ridge leaned forward slightly. "I'm going to ask you something, and you don't have to answer, but I need to know if someone is hurting you." Jace didn't flinch. He didn't cry. He did something worse. He went completely still. The stillness of a child who has been asked this question before, or something like it, and has learned that the answer doesn't matter because no one does anything with it. "He doesn't hit me anymore," Jace said quietly. "He just locks the door." Ridge's jaw tightened. One hand curled slowly into a fist beneath the table, then uncurled. He took a breath. held it, let it out through his nose. Where does he lock you? The garage. Is it heated? No. How long? Since August. Ridge was quiet for 10 seconds. In those 10 seconds, the diner hummed around them. Silverware on plates, the muffled country song, the cook scraping the grill, the low murmur of conversations that had all slowed slightly. The way conversations slow when people are listening without wanting to admit they're listening. In those 10 seconds, Ridge made a decision that would change everything. He pulled his phone from the inside pocket of his leather jacket. He scrolled through 3 contacts. He pressed call. The phone rang twice. Stone. Ridge's voice was steady, but there was something underneath it. A tension in the throat. A vibration in the lowest register. The sound of a man trying to keep his hands from shaking. I'm at Hatchet Creek Diner off 54. I need you to come now. Bring Deacon. Bring Cruz. And bring the kit. A pause on the other end. Yeah, Ridge said. It's that. He hung up. Jace was watching him with those enormous brown eyes, and for the first time there was something in them besides exhaustion. It was small. It was cautious. It was the faintest flicker of a question that the boy didn't dare ask out loud, because the last time he had trusted an adult with hope, the adult had locked him in a garage and let his leg rot. Who did you call? Jace whispered. Someone who gives a damn, Ridge said. Outside, the first snowflakes began to fall. They came slowly at first, drifting through the neon glow like ash from a fire that hadn't started yet, settling on the hoods of parked trucks and melting on the warm asphalt near the diner's exhaust vent. The temperature was dropping fast. The sky was the color of iron. Jace reached into the front pocket of his hoodie and pulled something out. It was small enough to fit in his palm, a brass key tag, rectangular, stamped with a number, 117. The kind of tag that comes attached to a motel room key at the kind of motel that still uses actual keys instead of cards. He set it on the table between them. Ridge looked at it. He didn't touch it. What's that? He said. Jace's voice dropped to almost nothing. My uncle keeps a room at the Pine Bluff Motor Lodge on Route 7. He goes there when he thinks I'm asleep. He keeps papers in there. About the money. What money? My mom and dad had insurance, a lot of it. My uncle told the lawyer he was using it for me, for school and food and the doctor. Jace paused. His lower lip trembled once, then went still. He doesn't use it for me. Ridge looked at the key tag. He looked at the boy. He looked at the door. Jace, how did you get here tonight? Walked. From Harlan. Yes. That's 11 miles. I know. On that leg. Jace didn't answer. He didn't need to. The answer was in the way he sat, in the way his body had folded in on itself like a structure that had been bearing weight too long, in the way his hands rested on the table now, small, filthy, scarred across the knuckles, where he had punched a concrete wall in the garage at some point during the months of darkness, not out of anger, but out of the desperate need to feel something other than cold. Ridge picked up his coffee, took a slow drink, set it down. You're not going back there tonight, he said. It was not a question, it was not a promise. It was a fact stated in the same tone a man uses to say the sun will come up or the road goes north. Jace heard it, and something inside him, something that had been clenched shut for 14 months, something that had been locked tighter than any garage door, loosened by a single imperceptible degree. Okay, Jace said. They sat in silence for 3 minutes. The snow came harder now, angling sideways across the parking lot in white streaks that looked almost violent in the neon light. The diner felt smaller, warmer, sealed off from the world outside. The waitress refilled Ridge's coffee without being asked and set a glass of water next to Jace's empty bowl. One of the nursing scrub women was watching them openly now, her phone on the table, her thumb hovering over the screen as if she was debating whether to call someone. Then Jace heard it. A low sound at first, almost lost beneath the wind. A mechanical growl, rising in pitch, joined by another, then another. The unmistakable harmonic of multiple V-twin engines approaching from the east. The sound grew, filling the air the way thunder fills a valley. Not sharp, but deep, pressing against the walls of the diner until the water in Jace's glass trembled. Headlights swept across the parking lot. One after another, motorcycles rolled in from Highway 54 and swung into the lot in a formation that looked both practiced and unhurried. 6 bikes, then 8, then 11. Heavy machines, Harleys and Indians, and a couple of stripped-down customs, ridden by men in black leather and denim, their faces set against the cold, their exhaust pipes trailing white vapor into the falling snow. The lead rider pulled to the center of the lot and killed his engine. He was tall, early 50s, with a shaved head and a beard gone to gray at the edges. His jacket bore the same wolf skull insignia as Ridge's, but with a larger patch beneath it. President. His name was Grayson Mercer. Everyone called him Stone. He had earned the name not from violence, but from an absolute geological refusal to move when someone needed him to stand still. He had buried 2 friends in Kandahar. He had buried his wife to cancer 6 years later. He had rebuilt himself not through healing, but through the slow, deliberate act of becoming useful to people who had no one else. Stone dismounted and walked toward the diner entrance. Behind him, the others followed, pulling off gloves, stamping boots against the cold. Among them, Deacon Hale, the club's medic, a former Navy corpsman who still carried a field kit everywhere he went. Cruz Delgado, vice president, a quiet man with a face that had been reconstructed after a roadside bomb, and eyes that missed nothing. Harlan Webb, the club's intelligence man, a retired county investigator who had left law enforcement after watching one too many cases get buried by people with the right connections. They filed into the diner. 11 men in leather and boots, bringing with them the smell of exhaust and cold air and something else, a weight, a density, a collective presence that changed the atmosphere of the room the way a storm changes the pressure in a valley. Conversations stopped. The couple in the front booth pressed closer to the window. The truck driver set down his spoon. The waitress stood behind the counter with the coffee pot raised and frozen, her mouth slightly open. Stone walked straight to the back booth. He stopped 3 feet from the table. He looked at Jace. He looked at the cast, the bruises visible above the collar of the hoodie, the boy's wrists where the bones pressed sharp against paper-thin skin. Then he looked at Ridge. Ridge said one word. Garage. Stone's eyes closed for 2 seconds. When they opened, something behind them had hardened into a material that would not bend. Deacon, Stone said without turning around, get your kit. Cruz, I need perimeter on the lot. Nobody comes in or out without my knowing. Harlan, start recording. Everything from this point forward is documented. The men moved. Not fast, not dramatic. They moved with the steady practice calm of people who had done this before. Not this exact thing, but things adjacent to it. Things that required the same combination of restraint and fury, the same ability to transform rage into procedure. Deacon knelt beside the booth and opened a medical bag. He looked at Jace with eyes that had seen field amputations and still managed to be gentle. Hey, bud, I'm Deacon. I'm not going to touch you without asking first. Can I look at your leg? Jace glanced at Ridge. Ridge gave a single, barely perceptible nod. Yeah, Jace said. It hurts a lot. I know it does. Deacon pulled on latex gloves. He smelled like antiseptic and motor oil. Can you tell me when it started hurting the most? Was it all at once, or did it get worse over time? Over time. It was okay for a while after the hospital. Then it started aching. Then it got really bad in October. Now it hurts all the time, even when I'm asleep. Deacon's jaw flexed. He gently lifted the leg of Jace's jeans, revealing the full length of the cast. Up close, it was worse than it had looked from across the table. The plaster was crumbling at the edges. A hairline crack ran its full length, and through that crack a faint, sour smell leaked. The smell of tissue that had been enclosed too long, unwashed, untreated. Ridge, Deacon said quietly, his voice so low that only the 2 men and the boy could hear. This cast should have been off 3 months ago. Whatever's underneath this is going to need imaging. Tonight. Ridge nodded. Stone pulled a chair from a nearby empty table and sat at the end of the booth, positioning himself so that his body blocked Jace from the view of the rest of the diner. It was a subtle movement, but deliberate, creating a wall of leather and muscle between the boy and the world that had failed him. Jace, Stone said. His voice was deep, unhurried, and carried the cadence of a man who knew that rushing a frightened child was the surest way to lose him. My name's Grayson. People call me Stone. Ridge called me because he thought you might need some help. Is that true? Jace looked at Stone. He studied the scars, the tattoos visible at the collar, the sheer size of the man. Then he looked back at Ridge. He's safe, Ridge said. As safe as me. Jace turned back to Stone. My uncle is going to be really mad, Jace said, when he finds out I'm gone. That's not something you need to worry about right now. You don't know him. Jace's voice carried a vibration that wasn't fear exactly, but something older, harder. The resignation of a child who has learned that the adults who promise to help are usually the first to hand him back. Everyone believes him, the social worker, the police, the doctor at the hospital. He's good at pretending. Stone leaned forward. His elbows rested on his knees. His eyes were level with Jace's. I'm not going to pretend, Stone said. I'm not going to promise you anything I can't deliver. But I'm going to tell you something true. Are you listening? Jace nodded. You walked 11 miles on a broken leg in a snowstorm to sit in a diner with a stranger. That means you already know no one is coming to save you. And that means you decided to save yourself. That is the hardest thing a person can do, and you already did it. Everything after this is easier. I promise you that. Jace's chin trembled, just once. Then it went still. Harlan had positioned himself near the front window with his phone recording. Cruz stood outside in the lot, his arms crossed, watching the road in both directions. The snow was coming down thick now, accumulating on the motorcycles, on the trucks, on the diner's roof. The world outside was turning white and silent. The world inside the diner smelled like coffee and soup and leather and the faint chemical tang of Deacon's antiseptic. Stone pulled his own phone from his jacket. He made 3 calls in rapid succession. The first was to the Barton County Sheriff's Department, requesting immediate welfare check authorization for a juvenile in critical condition. The second was to the Missouri Department of Children's Services emergency line, reporting suspected child abuse and neglect, requesting immediate protective custody evaluation. The third was to a woman named Vera Sinclair, a prosecutor in the circuit attorney's office who had worked with the Iron Veil before on cases where the system's cracks were wide enough to swallow children whole. Each call was brief, factual, calm. Stone gave names, locations, and a clinical summary of what Deacon had observed. He did not raise his voice, he did not editorialize. He delivered information the way a man delivers ammunition, precisely, efficiently, understanding that the weapon was useless without it. When he was done, he set the phone on the table and looked at Jace. People are coming, he said. Good people. People whose job it is to make sure you're safe. It's going to take a little time, and some of it is going to feel scary. But you're not going to be alone. Jace didn't respond. He was looking past Stone, past Ridge, past Deacon, past all of them. He was looking at the diner's front door, because through the glass, beyond the curtain of falling snow, beyond the row of motorcycles gleaming wet under the parking lot lights, a pair of headlights had turned off Highway 54 and was pulling slowly into the lot. It was a black Dodge Ram, clean, recent model, Missouri plates. Jace recognized it before anyone else did. His entire body went rigid. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like something had been pulled out of him. His hands gripped the edge of the table until his knuckles turned white, and a sound came from his throat. Not a word, not a cry, just a small, strangled noise that was the auditory equivalent of a door slamming shut. That's him, Jace whispered. That's my uncle. The truck stopped at the edge of the lot. The engine idled. The headlights cut through the snow and hit the diner's front window like searchlights. For a long, terrible moment, nothing happened. The truck just sat there, exhaust curling upward into the night, wipers beating slow against the accumulating snow. Then the driver's door opened. Rick Mercer stepped out. He was 44 years old, 6'1", clean-shaven, wearing a Carhartt jacket and work boots and the expression of a man who had been looking for something that belonged to him. He didn't look angry. He looked composed, controlled. He scanned the parking lot, took in the motorcycles, and his jaw tightened, but only slightly. He smoothed his jacket. He adjusted his collar. Then he walked toward the diner entrance with the steady, measured stride of a man who had spent 14 months convincing an entire community that he was a good man burdened with a difficult child. Cruz stepped into his path. "Diners at capacity," Cruz said. His voice was flat, his rebuilt face utterly unreadable. Rick stopped. He looked at Cruz, at the scars, the leather, the iron veil patch. "My nephew is in there," Rick said. His voice was calm, pleasant, the voice of a concerned guardian. "He's special needs, wanders off sometimes. I just need to collect him." "Nobody's collecting anybody tonight," Cruz said. Something flickered behind Rick's eyes, a flash of something that wasn't concern, something colder. Something that calculated distance and odds and consequence in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Inside the diner, Jace was pressed against the back of the booth, his knees drawn to his chest, his breathing rapid and shallow. Ridge had moved to the outside of the booth, positioning his body between the boy and the door. Stone stood. Deacon stayed low, his hand resting lightly on Jace's shoulder. "Jace?" Stone's voice cut through the boy's panic. "Look at me." Jace looked. "He cannot get to you. Do you understand? He cannot reach you." Through the diner window, Rick Mercer's face was visible. He was looking inside. His eyes moved across the room, past the counter, past the other customers, past the row of bikers standing between the booths, and landed directly on Jace. And for just 1 second, the mask slipped. It was brief, a fraction of a moment, but Ridge saw it. Stone saw it. Harlan, recording from 6 feet away, saw it. The expression that crossed Rick Mercer's face when he locked eyes with the boy through that glass was not the expression of a worried uncle. It was the expression of a man who had lost control of something he owned, and the fury beneath it was so pure and so absolute that it turned the falling snow outside into something that looked less like weather and more like a curtain being pulled back from a stage where the real performance was about to begin. Rick Mercer smiled. He raised one hand in a small wave, the kind of wave a father gives a child at a school pickup line, and he mouthed 2 words through the glass. "Come home." Jay stopped breathing, and in the silence that followed, in the space between the boy's terror and the Brotherhood's fury, and the storm pressing down on all of them, Ridge Callahan's phone buzzed once in his pocket. He pulled it out, looked at the screen, read the message. His face changed. He stood up slowly, turned to Stone, and said 5 words that would shatter everything they thought they knew about what was happening in that diner, about the boy, about the uncle, and about the 14 months of darkness that had brought them all to this frozen corner of Missouri. "Stone, it's not just the kid." The message on Ridge's phone was from a number he didn't recognize. No name, no area code he could place, just 6 words glowing against the cracked screen in the dim light of the back booth. "There are 2 more. Find them." Ridge held the phone so Stone could read it. Stone's eyes moved across the words, once, twice, and then his expression locked into something that didn't have a name. Something beyond anger, beyond calculation, something geological, like tectonic plates shifting beneath a surface that refused to crack. "2 more what?" Stone said. "Kids," Ridge said. "Has to be." "You know who sent this?" "No." Stone took the phone from Ridge's hand and studied the number. He turned to Harlan, who was still recording near the front window, and held the phone up. "Harlan, trace this." Harlan crossed the diner in 4 strides, took the phone, and began working. His fingers moved across the screen with the methodical patience of a man who had spent 22 years in county investigations before walking away from a system that punished curiosity more than corruption. Outside, the standoff continued. Cruz hadn't moved. Rick Mercer hadn't moved. The snow fell between them like static on a dead channel, and the parking lot lights cast their shadows long and thin across the white ground. Rick's hands were in his pockets. His face was pleasant, patient, the face of a man who had learned to wait people out because waiting was cheaper than fighting. But his eyes kept drifting to the diner window, kept finding Jace. Stone turned back to the booth. Jace was curled into the corner, his knees pressed to his chest, his face buried against his arms. Deacon sat beside him, not touching, just present, a wall of warmth and antiseptic and quiet breathing. "Jace," Stone's voice was low, controlled. "I need to ask you something important." The boy didn't lift his head. "Jace, are there other kids?" Silence. The jukebox had stopped. The diner felt like a sealed room, all the air slowly being pressed out of it. "Jace!" The boy raised his face. His eyes were dry. That was the worst part. A 9-year-old who had run out of tears months ago, whose body had simply stopped producing them because crying was a luxury that required hope. And hope was something that had been beaten out of him not with fists, but with silence and locked doors and the slow, grinding certainty that no one was coming. "I don't know," Jace said. "Maybe." "Maybe?" He talked on the phone sometimes, late at night, when he thought I was asleep in the garage. Jace's voice was small and precise, the voice of a child who had learned to listen through walls because listening was the only defense he had. He talked about placements, about how easy it was, about the money coming in monthly. He said names sometimes. I couldn't hear all of them. Stone crouched so his eyes were level with the boys. "Can you remember any of the names?" Jace's brow tightened, his hands twisted in the fabric of his hoodie. "Lily," he said. He said Lily a lot. And once, maybe twice, he said something about a kid in Polk County, but I don't know the name. He just called him the Polk One. Stone stood, his knees cracked. He crossed to where Ridge was standing near the counter and put his back to the room so that only Ridge could hear him. "If there are other children," Stone said, "this isn't a custody case. This is a pipeline." Ridge's jaw worked. A muscle in his temple jumped. "Insurance fraud?" "Bigger. Foster placements for profit. He gets the kids, collects the checks, trust payouts, insurance disbursements, state care subsidies, and warehouses them. Minimal cost, maximum return." "Who signs off on the placements?" "That's the question." They looked at each other. The weight of what was unfolding pressed down on both of them like the snow pressing down on the roof, silent and accumulating, and eventually enough to break something. "Stone!" Ridge's voice dropped to nearly nothing. "I know that look. Whatever you're thinking, we do this right. We don't go cowboy." "I never go cowboy." "Afghanistan, 2009, Fallujah compound. You went through a door alone." "There were children behind that door, too." The words landed between them and stayed there, heavy as spent brass. Ridge looked away first, not from weakness, from recognition. He knew that door. He had gone through similar doors himself, and he knew what it cost to go through them and what it cost to hesitate, and that both prices were paid in the same currency. Stone pulled out his phone and dialed Vera Sinclair again. This time, the conversation lasted 7 minutes. Stone paced near the counter, speaking in a low monotone that even Ridge could barely hear. When he hung up, his face had changed. The geological patience was still there, but beneath it, something had been activated. A mechanism that would not stop until it had completed its full rotation. "Vera's pulling placement records for Rick Mercer going back 5 years, Stone said, and she's flagging the Polk County connection. If there's a second child in the system under his control, she'll find them tonight." "And the third?" "If there is a third, they're either in the system or they're not. If they're not..." Stone let the sentence hang. The implication was clear enough. A child outside the system was a child no one was looking for. Ridge glanced toward the window. Rick was still standing in the parking lot, but he had moved. He was closer to his truck now, leaning against the tailgate, his phone to his ear. His mouth was moving fast. "He's calling someone," Ridge said. "Let him." "You're not worried?" Stone looked at Ridge with an expression that was almost, not quite, but almost, pity. "I'm counting on it. Whoever he calls next is the next person we need to find." The diner door opened. A blast of cold air rolled through the room, carrying snowflakes and the sharp bite of exhaust from the idling motorcycles. A deputy sheriff stepped inside. He was young, late 20s, with a red face and a uniform that looked too new to have seen much use. His hand rested on his belt, not on his weapon, but near it, the way a man's hand goes when he's nervous and trying not to show it. "I'm Deputy Lyle Granger, Barton County Sheriff's Department." His voice was pitched too high. He was addressing the room, but his eyes were on the bikers. "We got a call about a missing child. I need to speak to whoever's in charge here." Stone stepped forward. "I made the call." Granger looked at Stone, at the leather, the patches, the shaved head, the size of him, and his hand moved 1 inch closer to his belt. "You're Iron Veil?" "That's right." "The call said the child was in danger." "The child is in that booth." Stone pointed. His name is Jace Holloway. He's 9. He walked 11 miles in a snowstorm on a broken leg that hasn't been treated in 4 months. The man in the parking lot is his legal guardian, Rick Mercer, and I am telling you right now that child cannot leave with him tonight. Granger's eyes moved to the booth. He saw Jace. He saw the cast. He saw the way the boy was pressed into the corner like an animal trying to disappear into a wall. Something moved across the deputy's face. The same flicker that had crossed the waitress's face an hour ago. The same recognition before the decision not to recognize. But Granger was wearing a badge, which meant the decision carried different weight. I need to talk to Mr. Mercer, Granger said. He's outside. Granger moved toward the door, then stopped. He turned back to Stone. Nobody leaves until I sort this out. Wasn't planning on it. Granger went outside. Through the window, the entire diner watched him approach Rick Mercer. The two men stood in the snow, and even through the glass, even without hearing the words, the dynamic was visible. Rick was talking. Granger was listening. Rick's hands moved in calm, explanatory gestures, the gestures of a reasonable man dealing with an unreasonable situation. He pointed at the diner. He shook his head. He laughed once, a short, companionable laugh that fogged the air between them. And Granger was nodding. He's buying it, Ridge said from the window. His voice was tight. Stone said nothing. He was watching. Granger nodded again. He put his hand on Rick's shoulder, a brief, familiar touch, the kind of touch that said, I understand. I believe you. Let's get this sorted. Then both men turned and walked toward the diner entrance. Ridge looked at Stone. Stone looked at Jace. Jace was watching the door. His body had gone rigid again, that terrible stillness, and his lips were moving without sound. Ridge leaned close enough to hear, and what he heard was a single word, repeated like a circuit that had shorted. No, 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 no. The door opened. Rick Mercer stepped inside, the deputy behind him. The warmth of the diner hit Rick's face, and he smiled, a practiced, paternal, deeply convincing smile. And he spread his hands as if to say, See? Nothing to worry about. There he is, Rick said. His voice carried across the diner, warm and tired and laced with the exact right amount of exasperation. Jace, buddy, you scared me half to death. You can't just wander off like that. He took one step toward the booth. 11 men in leather shifted their weight at the same time. The movement was almost imperceptible, a half-inch adjustment, a squaring of shoulders, a settling of boots on linoleum. But the cumulative effect was like watching a wall solidify. Rick stopped. His smile didn't waver, but his eyes recalculated. Deputy? Rick turned to Granger, his voice dropping to a tone of controlled patience. I appreciate you coming out. My nephew has behavioral issues. He's been diagnosed. I have the paperwork at home, and he does this. He takes off. He tells stories. It's part of his condition. He tells stories, Ridge repeated from the back booth. His voice was flat as a blade laid on a table. Rick looked at Ridge. For the first time, the two men's eyes met directly, and the air between them compressed into something that had temperature and texture. Rick saw the scar, the leather, the wolf skull patch. Ridge saw the clean jacket, the clean hands, the clean face, and behind all of it, the machinery of a man who had turned deception into architecture. I'm sorry, Rick said, still addressing Granger but holding Ridge's gaze. Who is this? The man your nephew asked for help, Ridge said. My nephew doesn't need help. He needs his medication and his bed and his uncle. Rick's voice hardened by 1 degree. Just 1. Enough for Ridge to hear, not enough for Granger to notice. Jace, come on. We're going home. Jace didn't move. Jace, Rick's voice sharpened. Now. He's not going anywhere with you, Stone said. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't moved. He stood in the center of the diner like a column that had been poured into the floor, and the words came out of him with the weight of something that had been settled long before it was spoken. Rick turned to Stone. The mask shifted, not cracking, not yet, but tilting, the way a picture frame tilts on a wall before it falls. And you are? Nobody important, but the call I made to the Department of Children's Services 40 minutes ago. That's important. And the call I made to the circuit attorney's office. That's important. And the field medic who just examined your nephew's leg and documented 4 months of untreated injury. He's very important. Rick blinked. Once. The room was silent. 15 people breathing. Snow hitting the windows. Coffee maker gurgling on the counter. The hum of the dead neon light above the back booth. "This is ridiculous," Rick said, but his voice had lost its warmth. The temperature of it had dropped to match the parking lot. "Deputy, I'd like to take my nephew home. These men are... I don't even know who these men are. They're a motorcycle gang. They've got my nephew cornered in a booth, and they're making wild accusations based on what? The word of a 9-year-old with documented behavioral problems?" Granger shifted uncomfortably. His hand moved on his belt again. He was out of his depth, and he knew it, and the knowing made him dangerous in the way that uncertain men with authority are always dangerous. Not because they want to do the wrong thing, but because they want to do something, anything, to make the uncertainty stop. "Mr. Mercer does have legal custody," Granger said to Stone. He said it almost apologetically. "He does," Stone agreed. "And the state of Missouri also has a legal obligation to investigate when a mandatory reporter, or any citizen, presents evidence of child abuse or neglect. That investigation has been initiated. Until a social worker completes an assessment, that child stays in protective observation." "I haven't seen a social worker," Granger said. "She's 40 minutes out, driving from Springfield in a snowstorm." "You can wait." Rick took a breath. It was the breath of a man recalibrating, finding the angle, adjusting the performance. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, wounded. A man who had been hurt by suspicion. "Look," Rick said. He addressed the room now, all of them. "I lost my brother and my sister-in-law 14 months ago. I took Jace in because he had nobody. I'm not a perfect parent. I'm learning as I go. The leg, yes, I should have followed up with the doctor. I'll admit that. Things got away from me. But this?" He gestured at the bikers, at the booth, at the recording phone in Harlan's hand. "This is not what it looks like." "Then what does his leg look like?" Deacon stood from the booth. He was still wearing the latex gloves. He held up his phone, screen facing outward, showing the photographs he had taken of Jace's cast, the bruises, the malnourished frame. "What do these look like, Mr. Mercer?" Rick's eyes landed on the phone screen. For 1 second, one fraction of 1 second, his composure cracked. It was microscopic, a tightening at the corners of his mouth, a dilation of the pupils, a single involuntary contraction of the muscles around his eyes that was not sadness, not guilt, but rage. The rage of a man whose control had been breached. Then it was gone. The mask slid back into place. "My nephew bruises easily," Rick said. "The doctor can confirm that." "Which doctor?" Deacon said. "The one who put the cast on in August? The one you never brought him back to? I called Barton County General 20 minutes ago. They have no follow-up appointments for Jace Holloway. They have no record of contact from his guardian since the initial ER visit. What they do have is a note from the attending physician flagging the injury as inconsistent with the reported mechanism. A fall down porch steps doesn't produce a spiral fracture, Mr. Mercer. A twisting force does." The diner was a held breath. Rick Mercer stood in the center of the room, 11 bikers arrayed around him, a deputy behind him who was slowly beginning to understand that he was not in the middle of a custody dispute, but standing at the edge of something much deeper and much darker. Rick's hands, which had been open and gesturing, went still at his sides. His chin lifted slightly. The pleasantness drained from his face the way color drains from a sky before a storm, and what was left was something lean and hard and absolutely calculating. "I want a lawyer," Rick said, "and I want my nephew." "You can have the first one," Stone said. "You can't have the second." Rick's gaze swung to Jace. The boy hadn't moved from the corner of the booth. He was watching his uncle with an expression that Ridge had seen before. On the faces of men in forward operating bases who could hear incoming fire and knew there was nowhere to go. It was the expression of someone who had accepted that survival was not guaranteed and was simply waiting to learn the outcome. "Jace," Rick said. His voice dropped to something private, intimate, the frequency reserved for closed rooms and locked garages, and words spoken where no one else could hear. "Tell them we're fine. Tell them you want to come home." Jace opened his mouth. Every person in the diner leaned forward by an inch. "I don't want to go back to the garage," Jace said. His voice cracked on the last word. It was the loudest sound in the room. Rick's face emptied, not anger, not denial. Something worse. A blankness that was the visible surface of a mind running through every available exit and finding them sealed. "The boy is confused," Rick said to Granger. "He's been out in the cold. He's not making sense." Granger looked at Jace. He looked at the cast. He looked at Deacon's phone. He looked at the 11 men who stood between Rick Mercer and the booth, like a wall that had been poured from iron and grief. "Mr. Mercer," Granger said slowly, "I think we should wait for the social worker." The shift was small. A deputy choosing to wait rather than act. A man in a uniform deciding that uncertainty was more dangerous than patience. But in that small shift, something enormous turned. A gear that had been jammed for 14 months finally grinding forward. Rick heard it. He felt the mechanism engage. And for the first time, fear moved across his face. Not fear of the bikers, not fear of the deputy, but fear of the thing he could not control, other people believing the boy. He took a step back, then another. He reached behind him for the door handle without turning around, his eyes still locked on Jace, and he pushed the door open into the cold. "This isn't over," he said. He said it to the room, but he was looking at Jace. Cruz was outside. 2 more Iron Veil members flanked the entrance. Rick walked between them to his truck without another word. He got in. He sat for a long moment behind the wheel, his face lit blue by the glow of his phone. Then the truck's headlights snapped on, the engine roared, and he backed out of the parking lot in a spray of snow and gravel, taillights disappearing east on Highway 54. He was gone. But the shape of him lingered in the room like the afterimage of a flashbulb, bright, disorienting, and slow to fade. Stone crossed to the booth and sat down across from Jace. Ridge was already there, standing at the edge like a sentry. The boy's breathing had slowed, but his hands were still shaking, and his eyes were fixed on the door as if expecting the truck to reappear. "He's calling someone right now," Jace said quietly. "He always calls when something goes wrong. There's a man, I don't know his name, but my uncle calls him when he needs things to go away." Stone and Ridge exchanged a look. "What kind of things?" Stone said. "Problems. The neighbor who came over once asking about me. The school that sent a letter. My uncle called the man, and then the problem stopped. The neighbor moved. The school letter stopped coming." Harlan appeared at Stone's shoulder. He held Ridge's phone in his own. "The anonymous text," Harlan said. "Burner phone, prepaid, activated 3 days ago at a Walmart in Joplin. No way to trace the buyer." He paused. "But here's what's interesting. The phone has sent exactly one other message before the one to Ridge. That message went to the Polk County Department of Social Services, sent 2 days ago. The content was flagged by their intake system but hasn't been reviewed yet." "Someone's been trying to blow the whistle," Ridge said. "Someone who knows the whole picture," Harlan said. "Someone who knows about the kid in Polk County and knows about Jace and knows that the normal channels won't work, so they went around them. They found us." Stone was quiet for a long time. Snow pelted the windows. The diner had emptied slowly over the past hour. The couple, the truck driver, the nursing scrub women had all left, one by one, slipping out during lulls in the confrontation, leaving behind half-eaten plates and crumpled napkins and the faint guilt of people who had witnessed something they would have to decide whether to remember. Only the waitress remained, standing behind the counter with her arms crossed and her face set in an expression that had migrated from fear to something harder. Something like resolve. "There's a system," Stone said finally. "Not just one man taking advantage of one kid. There's a structure, placements, payouts, someone signing off, someone looking the other way. And someone, whoever sent that text, is inside it and trying to get out." Ridge leaned against the booth. The leather of his jacket creaked. His eyes were on Jace, who had finally stopped shaking and was sitting very still, his small hands wrapped around the glass of water the waitress had left, holding it like an anchor. "How deep does this go?" Ridge said. It wasn't really a question. "As deep as the money goes," Stone said, "and the money always goes deep." Headlights again. This time, 2 vehicles bus up A white sedan and a Barton County Sheriff's Cruiser pulled into the lot simultaneously. A woman in a dark coat stepped out of the sedan, carrying a leather folder and walking with the purposeful stride of someone who had driven 40 minutes through a blizzard and intended to make every second count. She was tall, mid-40s, with close-cropped hair and reading glasses pushed to the top of her head. Her name tag read M. Delacroix, MDCS, Emergency Response. The cruiser held a different deputy, older, heavier. He stepped out and exchanged a few words with Granger that no one inside could hear, and Granger's posture changed. His shoulders dropped, his hand moved away from his belt, and his face took on the expression of a man who had just been told quietly and firmly that the situation was above his pay grade. Delacroix entered the diner. She scanned the room in 2 seconds. Her eyes landed on Jace, and something tightened in her face. A professional tightening, the controlled recognition of someone who had seen 100 variations of this exact tableau and knew that the ones involving children in winter were always the worst. "I'm Michelle Delacroix, Emergency Response, Department of Children's Services." She addressed Stone, but was already moving toward the booth. "I need to see the child. Now." Deacon stepped aside. Delacroix knelt beside the booth, bringing herself to Jace's eye level. She did not touch him. She did not smile. She looked at him the way a person looks at a house fire, with full attention, with measured urgency, with the understanding that the first priority is determining whether anyone is still alive inside. "Hi, Jace. My name is Michelle. I'm going to ask you some questions, and I need you to tell me the truth, even if the truth feels scary. Can you do that?" Jace looked at Ridge, then at Stone, then back at Michelle. "Yes," he said. Michelle opened her leather folder. She began asking questions in a low, steady voice. About the garage, about the cast, about the food, about the phone calls, about the motel key, about how long, about how often, about who else knew. Jace answered each one in the same flat, precise voice he had used with Stone, the voice of a child who had rehearsed this testimony in his own mind 1,000 times in the dark, waiting for someone to finally ask. Outside, the snow was building. 3 inches on the parking lot now, maybe 4. The motorcycles were buried up to their engine guards. The neon sign buzzed and flickered, and the night pressed in from all sides, and inside the diner, a 9-year-old boy was doing the bravest thing he would ever do, telling the truth to someone with the power to act on it. Ridge stepped outside. He needed air. He needed the cold. He stood on the diner's front step and lit a cigarette, the first one in 8 months, and the smoke mixed with his frozen breath and rose into the falling snow. His hands were steady now. The shaking had stopped. Something else had replaced it. Something heavier. Something that settled into his chest like ballast in the hull of a ship. Cruz appeared beside him. "Rick Mercer's phone records," Cruz said. Harlan pulled what he could from the carrier lookup. In the last 20 minutes, Rick made 4 calls. 1 to a residential number in Harlan, probably his house. 1 to the Pine Bluff Motor Lodge. 1 to an attorney in Barton County. Cruz paused. And 1 to a number registered to the Barton County Department of Social Services. Ridge turned his head slowly. The cigarette burned between his fingers. He called DCS? Direct line, not the switchboard. A personal extension. "Whose?" Cruz held up his phone. On the screen was a name pulled from a county employee directory. Ridge read it. The cigarette dropped from his fingers into the snow, and he didn't notice. "That's Jace's caseworker," Ridge said. "That's the social worker who signed off on the placement." "Darlene Fitch," Cruz confirmed. "He's not just calling his lawyer, he's calling the person who put the boy there." Cruz said nothing. He didn't need to. The implications unfolded in the frozen air between them like a map being spread across a table, and every road on that map led to the same destination. The system that was supposed to protect Jace Holloway had not merely failed. It had been designed to fail. The locks, the silence, the missing follow-up appointments, the school withdrawal that no one questioned. None of it was negligence. All of it was architecture. Ridge crushed the cigarette under his boot and went back inside. He walked straight to Stone, who was standing near the counter watching Michelle work. "We have a problem," Ridge said. "The social worker who placed Jace with Rick Mercer, Darlene Fitch. Rick just called her. Direct line, personal extension, 20 minutes ago." Stone's expression didn't change, but his hands, which had been resting at his sides, slowly curled into fists and stayed that way. Vera Sinclair needs to know this before morning, Stone said. Stone. If Fitch is compromised, every placement she's signed off on is contaminated. Every kid she's put somewhere, we don't know what they walked into. I know. And if Rick gets to her before we do, if she starts shredding files or scrubbing records, I know, Ridge. The two men stood facing each other. Around them, the diner hummed with its dying rhythms. The last pot of coffee, the waitress wiping down tables she had already wiped, Deacon repacking his medical kit, Harlan still working his phone, and in the booth, Jace answering Michelle Delacroix's questions with the calm, devastating precision of a boy who had nothing left to lose. Stone's phone rang. He answered it, listened for 30 seconds, and hung up without saying a word. He looked at Ridge. His face was the face of a man who had just opened a door and found exactly the kind of darkness he had spent his entire life preparing for. That was Vera, Stone said. She pulled the placement records. Rick Mercer is the legal guardian of 3 children in the state of Missouri. Jace Holloway, placed 14 months ago. Lily Chen, age 7, placed 9 months ago in the same house. And a boy named Marcus Webb, age 11, placed in Polk County under a secondary guardianship arrangement 6 months ago. Ridge's breath left him. 3 kids. 3 kids. And Vera says the financial disclosures attached to all 3 placements were filed by the same caseworker. Fitch. Fitch. Stone's voice was iron-dragged across stone. And the court that approved every placement, the family court judge who signed every order without a hearing, is Judge Raymond Orr, Barton County Family Court. How many people are in this? Stone looked out the window at the falling snow, at the buried motorcycles, at the empty highway stretching into darkness. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a man who understood that the next 48 hours would determine whether 3 children lived or disappeared into a system that had been turned into a machine for erasing them. Enough people to build it, Stone said, and not enough people to stop us from tearing it down. In the booth, Jace Holloway set down his glass of water. He looked at Ridge through the gap between Stone's shoulder and the edge of the counter. His eyes were steady, his hands were still. And he said very quietly to no one and to everyone, "Lily's in the basement." 3 words. Lily's in the basement. They hit the diner like a bullet through plate glass. Silent entry, catastrophic exit. Every man in the room turned toward the booth. Michelle Delacroix's pen stopped moving. Deacon's hands froze over his medical kit. The waitress behind the counter set down a coffee mug with a sound that was too loud in the sudden vacuum. Stone crossed the diner in 4 strides. He didn't sit. He braced both hands on the edge of the booth and leaned in until his face was 2 feet from Jace's. "Say that again." Jace's voice didn't waver. "Lily, she's in the basement, at the house. Your uncle's house." "Yes. Right now. She's always in the basement. She doesn't come upstairs." He put a lock on the door from the outside, the kind with the deadbolt. Jace's eyes were dry, flat, reporting facts the way a field observer reports coordinates. No emotion, just data. "I hear her crying sometimes, through the floor, when I'm in the garage." Stone straightened. The air in his lungs came out in a single controlled exhale that fogged the space between them. He turned to Ridge. Their eyes met, and in that exchange was a calculation that required no words. A 7-year-old girl locked in a basement on a night when the temperature outside was 12 degrees and dropping, in a house whose owner had just been exposed and was now running scared with a phone full of contacts and a head full of desperation. "How long?" Ridge said. "How long has she been there?" Jace's brow creased, as if the question required measuring something that had no edges. "Since before it got cold. Maybe September. I don't know exactly. He brought her in at night. I wasn't supposed to know." "But you heard." "I hear everything. The garage wall is thin." Michelle Delacroix stood. She was already dialing. Her face had shifted from professional calm to something sharper. The controlled urgency of a woman who understood that every minute spent in this diner was a minute. A 7-year-old girl was alone in a locked basement in a house whose furnace probably hadn't been turned on for anyone but the man who lived upstairs. "I need an emergency removal order," Michelle said into her phone. Her voice was clipped, rapid, stripped of everything except function. Mercer residence, rural route outside Harlan, Missouri. Minor female, approximately age 7. Reported confined to a basement room. Name, Lily Chen. I need sheriff's units, and I need them now, not Granger, someone senior. Stone was already moving. He pointed at Cruz. Truck, now. He pointed at Deacon. Kit, full trauma load. He pointed at Harlan. Stay here. Document everything. Don't let Jace out of your sight. I'm coming, Ridge said. Stone stopped. He turned. The look he gave Ridge was not a question and not a command. It was an assessment, the kind of assessment one combat veteran makes of another before entering a building that might contain anything. Your hands steady? Stone asked. Ridge held up both hands. They were still. Rock and iron and scar tissue, illuminated by the flickering neon from outside. Then you're driving, Stone said. They moved through the diner's front door into the full force of the storm. The snow had intensified in the past hour, shifting from scattered flakes to a dense driving curtain that cut visibility to 30 yards. The parking lot was buried. The motorcycles were shapes under white drifts. Cruz's truck, a heavy-duty Ford with oversized tires and a steel brush guard, was idling at the edge of the lot, exhaust pouring white into the black air. Ridge climbed behind the wheel. Stone took shotgun. Cruz and Deacon loaded into the back seat, Deacon cradling the medical bag between his knees like a man holding a child. The doors slammed shut, one after another, 4 concussions of metal that sounded like the chambers of a revolver cycling. Ridge pulled onto Highway 54. The truck's headlights punched 2 columns of white light through the falling snow, illuminating nothing but the endless hypnotic rush of flakes against the windshield. The wipers beat a steady rhythm. No one spoke. The heater roared. The road was empty. 11 miles to Harlan. 11 miles that Jace had walked on a broken leg, in the dark, in the cold, with nothing but a brass motel key and the desperate animal knowledge that if he didn't leave tonight, he would not survive to leave at all. Ridge drove fast. Not reckless. Fast. The truck held the road through the packed snow with the heavy, deliberate traction of something built for exactly this. He watched the center line and the shoulders and the tree line and the mirror, all at once, the way a man watches a landscape when he's been trained to expect contact from any direction. Rick's got a 30-minute head start, Cruz said from the back seat. If he went straight home, he didn't go straight home, Stone said. He called 4 people. One of them was the social worker. One was the motel. He's cleaning, destroying evidence, covering ground. And the girl? Stone was quiet for 3 seconds. If he's smart, he moves her. If he's panicking, he leaves her and runs. And if he's neither, Ridge said, eyes on the road. The silence in the truck answered that question. If Rick Mercer was neither smart nor panicking, if he was something else, something colder, something that had already calculated the mathematics of loose ends, then a 7-year-old girl in a locked basement was not a person to be moved or abandoned. She was evidence to be eliminated. Ridge's foot pressed harder on the accelerator. They passed the Harlan town limit at 9:47 p.m. The town was dark. A single streetlight at the main intersection illuminated the post office, the feed store, a shuttered gas station. No traffic. No pedestrians. The kind of small Missouri town that looked abandoned even when everyone was home, because the homes were spread far apart and the darkness between them was absolute. Stone directed Ridge off the main road onto a gravel county route that wound north through bare timber. The headlights caught fence posts, mailboxes, the occasional reflective eye of a deer at the tree line. Then, half a mile down a side road with no name, a house materialized through the snow. It was a single-story structure with a partial basement set back from the road behind a screen of leafless oaks. White vinyl siding stained gray by weather and neglect. A covered porch with a sagging rail. No lights. No vehicles in the gravel drive. The black Dodge Ram was absent. Ridge killed the headlights and coasted the last 100 yards, stopping at the edge of the property. He's not here, Cruz said. Doesn't mean she's not, Stone said. He opened his door and stepped into the snow. His boots sank 4 inches. The cold hit immediately. Not the cold of the diner parking lot, but a deeper cold, a rural cold, the kind that comes when there's nothing between you and the wind for 50 miles. They moved up the driveway. 4 men, spread slightly, each watching a different angle. Not a military formation. They had all been military once, but they weren't military now. They were something else. Something that existed in the space between the law and the failures of the law, in the gap between what the system promised and what it delivered. Ridge reached the front porch first. The boards creaked under his weight. The front door was closed, but not locked. The handle turned freely. He pushed it open and the smell hit him like a physical barrier. Old garbage, stale cigarettes, something chemical, bleach maybe, or ammonia. The kind of smell that comes from a house that hasn't been cleaned in months and then has been suddenly, desperately cleaned in a hurry. On top of all of it, the cold. The house was cold. Not as cold as outside, but close. The thermostat on the hall wall read 51 degrees. Stone flipped a light switch. A single bulb in the hallway ceiling flickered on, casting yellow light across stained carpet and bare walls. The house was nearly empty. A couch in the living room, a television on a folding table, a kitchen with a sink full of dishes. No photographs, no children's belongings, no evidence that a child had ever lived here except for a single item sitting on the kitchen counter. A plastic cereal bowl, the kind with a cartoon character on the bottom, sitting in a dried ring of milk that had been there long enough to turn yellow. "Basement," Stone said. They found the door in the hallway between the kitchen and a bedroom. It was a standard interior door, hollow core, painted white, but the hardware was wrong. A heavy-gauge sliding bolt had been installed on the hallway side, the kind of bolt meant for an exterior gate or a storage shed. It was closed, locked, from the outside. Ridge stared at the bolt. His hand reached for it, stopped, hung in the air. "Deacon," he said. His voice was barely audible. "Be ready." He slid the bolt. The metal scraped against the bracket with a sound that was too loud in the silent house. He pulled the door open. Stairs, narrow, unfinished. Bare wood treads disappearing into darkness. The smell from below was different, damper, colder, carrying the faint sweetness of unwashed skin and old fabric. A single pull-chain light hung at the top of the stairs. Ridge pulled it. A bare bulb lit the stairwell, revealing concrete walls, exposed pipes, and a floor that was half concrete and half packed earth. He descended. Stone was behind him, Deacon behind Stone. Cruz held the top of the stairs. The basement was small, maybe 15 by 20 feet. The ceiling was low enough that Stone had to duck. Against the far wall, a mattress sat on the floor. No frame, no box spring, just a twin mattress, stained and flat, with a single blanket bunched at one end. Beside the mattress, a plastic bucket, a gallon jug of water, 2/3 empty, a brown paper bag containing 3 granola bar wrappers, and nothing else. And on the mattress, curled into a shape so small it could have been a pile of laundry, was a girl. She was 7 years old. Her hair was black, tangled, matted against one side of her head where she had been sleeping on it. She wore a long-sleeved shirt 2 sizes too big and sweatpants with the drawstring pulled tight enough to bunch the waistband into folds. Her feet were bare. Her skin, in the light of the single bulb, was the color of old paper. Her eyes were open. She was staring at them. She was not screaming. She was not crying. She was not moving. She was watching them with an expression that Ridge recognized from a place so deep in his memory that accessing it felt like reaching into a wound. It was the expression of someone who has been in the dark so long that the sudden appearance of light does not feel like rescue. It feels like a new kind of danger. Deacon moved past Ridge. He set his medical bag on the floor and crouched at the edge of the mattress, keeping 3 feet of distance, making himself as small as a man his size could manage. "Lily," Deacon said. His voice was the voice he used in field hospitals, slow, warm, calibrated to a frequency that could reach through shock and pain and the white noise of survival mode. "My name is Deacon. You're not in trouble. Nobody here is going to hurt you. We're going to get you out of here." Lily didn't respond. Her eyes moved from Deacon to Ridge to Stone and back to Deacon. She was cataloging them, measuring them, calculating whether these large men in leather and boots were the same kind of large men as the one who locked the door at the top of the stairs. "Lily," Deacon tried again. "Can you talk to me? Can you tell me how you're feeling?" Nothing. Then, so small it was almost inaudible, a sound. Not a word, a breath with a shape inside it, a single syllable that had been compressed by terror and cold and weeks of darkness into something barely recognizable as language. Cold. Ridge turned away. He faced the concrete wall and pressed both palms against it and closed his eyes and breathed through his nose in long, measured pulls, because if he didn't, he was going to put his fist through the wall, and putting his fist through the wall wouldn't help the girl on the mattress. His hands shook. His jaw shook. Something behind his sternum was cracking along fault lines that had been there since Helmand Province, since the explosion that took half his face, since the first time he understood that the world contained people who locked other people in dark rooms and left them there. Stone was already on the phone. His voice was granite. "Vera, we're at the house. We found the girl, Lily Chen, age 7. She's alive. Basement confinement. No heat, no sanitation, minimal food and water. We need paramedics, we need police, and we need them here before Rick Mercer comes back, because if he walks through that door before they arrive, I cannot guarantee what happens next." He hung up. He looked at Ridge's back, at the man's hands pressed flat against the concrete, at the tremor running through his shoulders. "Ridge!" Ridge didn't turn. "Ridge, I need you upstairs. I need you at the door. I need your eyes on that road." Ridge exhaled. He pushed off the wall. He turned. His face was composed, but his eyes were not. His eyes were the eyes of a man who was holding something back by force of will alone. And the will was not infinite. "Go," Stone said. Ridge went up the stairs. Cruz was at the top, his rebuilt face set in an expression that could have been carved from the same stone as his name. He looked at Ridge. He didn't ask what was downstairs. He could see it in the way Ridge moved. "Front window," Ridge said. "Both of us. He comes back. I want to see his headlights from a mile out." They positioned themselves in the dark living room. Through the window, the gravel road was a white ribbon between black trees. Snow continued to fall. The house groaned in the wind. From below, the muffled sound of Deacon's voice, slow, patient, repeating simple words, building a bridge syllable by syllable toward a child who had forgotten what bridges were for. Ridge's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. Harlan's name. "Talk," Ridge said. "I've been digging." Harlan's voice was tight, compressed, the voice of a man who had found something he wished he hadn't. "The placement records Vera pulled, I cross-referenced them with the county court filings. Every one of Rick Mercer's guardianship appointments was handled through Judge Orr's court. Everyone was processed by Darlene Fitch. But here's where it gets bad. It's already bad, Harlan. It gets worse. Fitch didn't just process Jace's placement. She processed 9 placements in the last 4 years. All single guardian assignments. All to individuals with no prior fostering experience. All with attached insurance payouts or trust disbursements or state subsidy packages that exceed the standard rates by 200 to 300%. Ridge was quiet. The snow fell outside the window. 9 kids, Ridge said. 9 placements. I can't confirm 9 kids yet. Some of those placements may have been terminated, returned to biological family, aged out. But at least 9 entries went through the same pipeline. Same caseworker, same judge, same financial structure. Where are the other 6? I don't know yet. That's what Vera's working on. But Ridge, listen to me. One of those 9 placements was terminated 8 months ago. A boy named Tyler Briggs, age 10. The record says he was returned to his biological father in Oklahoma. But the biological father died in 2021. DCS records show the termination was filed by Fitch and signed by Orr. The implication descended through the silence like something falling through deep water. A child whose placement was terminated and returned to a dead parent was a child who had been removed from the system entirely. Not transferred, not relocated, erased. Where's the boy? Ridge said. Nobody knows. That's the point. Nobody's looking because on paper, he's accounted for. Ridge closed his eyes. Behind them, the darkness was not empty. It was full of faces, Jace's face, Lily's face, and now a face he had never seen, a 10-year-old boy named Tyler Briggs, who existed in a county database as a closed file and nowhere else. Harlan, keep pulling. Everything you can find. Every name, every address, every dollar that moved through that system. And call Vera. Tell her about Tyler Briggs. Tell her tonight. He hung up. He looked at Cruz. 9 kids, Ridge said. Cruz's jaw tightened. His hands, resting on the windowsill, curled slowly into fists. This isn't one man, Cruz said. This is a business. Yeah. Rick Mercer, Darlene Fitch, Judge Raymond Orr. Minimum 3 people. Probably more. Probably. And one of them, at least one of them, made a child disappear. The word sat between them in the dark living room like an object with mass and temperature. Outside, the wind changed direction, driving snow against the window glass in patterns that looked almost deliberate, almost like someone was writing something in a language that no one alive could read. Sirens. Distant, muffled by snow and timber, but unmistakable. Coming from the south. Coming from Harlan. Ambulance, Cruz said. And sheriff. 2 vehicles. They watched the lights appear, red and blue pulsing through the snowfall, turning the trees into strobing silhouettes. 2 vehicles, as Ridge had predicted. An ambulance and a county cruiser. They turned off the main road and crawled up the gravel lane, their tires crunching through 4 inches of accumulation. Ridge went to the front door and opened it. The paramedics came first. A man and a woman, both bundled in heavy coats carrying cases. Ridge directed them downstairs without explanation. The explanation was in the basement. The deputy was the older one from the diner, the one who had taken over from Granger. His name was Braddock. He was in his 50s, heavy-set, with the slow, deliberate movements of a man who had learned that speed was usually the enemy of accuracy. He stood on the porch and looked at Ridge. "What am I walking into?" Braddock said. "A 7-year-old girl locked in a basement with no heat, no food, and no light. A 9-year-old boy back at the diner who walked 11 miles to tell someone about it. And a guardian who made 4 phone calls before running, one of which was to his caseworker." Braddock absorbed this. His face didn't change, but something behind his eyes rearranged itself. "Where's Mercer now?" "Unknown. His truck isn't here. He left the diner heading east on 54 approximately 90 minutes ago." "And you are?" "The man who answered the phone when the kid asked for help." Braddock studied Ridge for a long moment. Then he nodded once, slowly, with the gravity of a man choosing a side. "Stay available," Braddock said. "I'm going to need statements from all of you." He went inside. Ridge heard his boots on the basement stairs, heard the pause, that terrible pause that every person made when they reached the bottom and saw the mattress and the bucket and the girl, and then heard his voice, low and professional, speaking into his radio. Ridge stepped off the porch into the snow. He walked 20 yards from the house and stopped in the darkness between 2 oak trees. The cold was absolute. His breath came in thick white clouds. Above him, the sky was invisible, just a low, pressing darkness that seemed to have no ceiling. His phone buzzed again. Unknown number, different from the first. He answered. Silence on the other end. Then breathing, ragged, fast, the breathing of someone who is running or crying or both. "Who is this?" Ridge said. A woman's voice, young, terrified, broken in places that made the words come out in fragments. You found Lily? Who is this? Please tell me you found her." "We found her. She's alive. Who is this?" A sound on the other end, not a sob. Something worse. The sound of a person exhaling a breath they've been holding for so long that releasing it feels like a piece of their body leaving. "My name is Darlene Fitch." Ridge's hand tightened on the phone. The name hit him like a fist to the base of the skull. Darlene Fitch, the caseworker, the woman who signed the placements, the woman who processed the paperwork that put Jace in the garage and Lily in the basement and Tyler Briggs into a void. "You have 10 seconds, Ridge said. His voice had dropped to something that barely qualified as human speech. 10 seconds to explain why I shouldn't hang up and let the prosecutor find you. Because I'm the one who sent you the text." The world tilted. Ridge felt it. A physical sensation, as if the frozen ground beneath his boots had shifted 2 degrees off axis. The anonymous message. The burner phone from Joplin. There are 2 more. Find them. That was you. I've been trying to get out for 2 years. Her voice was shaking, each word costing something visible even through a phone connection. Rick has things on me, things I did, things I signed. I didn't know what it was at first. The first placement, it seemed normal. An uncle taking in his nephew, standard kinship care. I processed it like any other case. But then the second one came, and the money was wrong. And when I tried to flag it, Orr called me into his chambers and... Her voice broke. And what? Ridge said. He showed me photographs of my daughter at her school, at the playground, sitting in our car in the driveway. He didn't say anything. He just laid them out on his desk and looked at me. And then he said, "These placements are going to keep moving through your desk, Darlene, and you're going to keep signing them, and your daughter is going to keep going to that school. Do we understand each other?" Ridge pressed his free hand against the trunk of the oak tree. The bark was frozen, rough, real. He needed something real because the thing he was hearing was an architecture of evil so deliberate and so complete that it felt like fiction. "The photographs," Ridge said. "Who took them?" "I don't know. Someone Orr uses, someone Rick uses. They're connected. Rick, Orr, and someone else, a financial person. The money flows through a trust management company in Springfield. I've seen the name on the documents, but I've never met anyone there. It's called Ridgeline Asset Partners." "How many children?" 9 placements through my desk, but I think there are more through other caseworkers. I think Orr has other people in other counties. Ridge closed his eyes. 9 was not the ceiling, 9 was the floor. "Tyler Briggs," Ridge said, "the placement that was terminated 8 months ago. Returned to a biological father who's been dead since 2021. Where is that boy?" The silence on the other end lasted 5 seconds. When Darlene spoke again, her voice had changed. It was the voice of a woman who was about to say something that would make her complicit in something she could never undo. "I don't know where Tyler is," she said. "I filed the termination because Orr ordered me to. He said the boy was being relocated. He said it was handled. I asked where. He told me to stop asking." "And you stopped?" "I have a 6-year-old daughter, Mr. Callahan. They had photographs of her. What would you have done?" Ridge didn't answer, not because he didn't have an answer, but because the answer was complicated in ways that a single sentence couldn't hold. He would have burned the world down. He would have taken his daughter and disappeared. He would have done exactly what Darlene did, or exactly the opposite. And the difference between those two choices was not courage or cowardice, but the specific texture of fear in a specific throat at a specific moment. And no one could judge that from the outside. "Where are you right now?" Ridge said. "My car. Parked outside the Walmart in Joplin. The same one where I bought the burner phone. I've been sitting here for 3 hours trying to decide whether to call you or drive to the police or drive off a bridge." "Don't drive off a bridge." "I wasn't going to. I have a daughter." "Then drive to Springfield. Go to the circuit attorney's office. Ask for Vera Sinclair. Tell her everything you just told me. Everything. The placements, the money, the photographs, or Ridgeline Asset Partners, all of it. They'll arrest me. Maybe. And then you'll be on record. And then your daughter will know that when it counted, you chose the right door." Silence. The wind moved through the bare oaks. Snow collected on Ridge's shoulders, on his hair, on the phone pressed against his ear. "Okay," Darlene whispered. "Okay." She hung up. Ridge stood in the snow for a long time. He watched the paramedics carry Lily out of the house on a stretcher, small, wrapped in thermal blankets, her dark hair the only part of her visible. She was not moving. She was not crying. She was staring up at the falling snow as if she had never seen a sky before. And maybe she hadn't. Maybe the basement ceiling had been her sky for so long that the real one, vast and open and full of cold white motion, was incomprehensible. They loaded her into the ambulance. The doors closed. The siren started, and the vehicle pulled away down the gravel road, its red lights pulsing through the snow until they disappeared behind the tree line, and the darkness filled back in like water filling a hole. Stone came out of the house. He stood beside Ridge under the oaks. Both men watched the empty road. "Fitch called me," Ridge said. Stone turned his head. "She sent the text, the anonymous one. She's been inside the operation for 2 years. Orr's been threatening her daughter. She's scared, she's compromised, and she's driving to Springfield right now to talk to Vera. Stone processed this in silence. The snow collected on his shaved head and melted from his body heat, running down his temples like sweat. "You believe her," Stone said. "I believe she's terrified. That's enough for now." "And the operation?" "Bigger than Rick. Bigger than Fitch. There's a judge, or there's a financial entity, Ridgeline Asset Partners, Springfield. And there are more kids, Stone, not just the 9 through Fitch's desk. She thinks Orr has people in other counties." Stone's breath came out in a long white plume that hung in the air before the wind tore it apart. "A network," Stone said. "A machine." "How many children?" "She doesn't know. Nobody knows. That's by design." Stone looked at the house. The lights were on now, every room illuminated by bare bulbs, and through the windows the house looked like what it was. A shell designed to look like a home from the outside while functioning as a warehouse from the inside. Storage for children. Inventory management. The language of business applied to the bodies of kids who had no one left to miss them. "Tyler Briggs," Stone said. "The missing boy. Terminated on paper, returned to a dead father. Nobody knows where he is." "Somebody knows. Orr knows. Then we need Orr. We need Vera to get Orr. We don't touch him. We don't go near him. A sitting judge, Stone, if we approach him, every piece of evidence we've gathered tonight becomes contaminated. Every charge gets challenged. Every defense attorney in the state lines up to argue that a motorcycle club intimidated a judicial officer and tainted the investigation." Stone's jaw worked. Ridge could hear his teeth grinding. "I know," Stone said. "I know how this works." "Then let it work." "While Tyler Briggs is somewhere we can't find. While there might be other children in other basements that we don't know about. Let it work. Let the system work. The same system that put Jace in that garage and Lily in this basement. That system. A different part of it, Vera, Braddock, Delacroix, the parts that still function." Stone turned to Ridge. In the darkness, in the snow, his face was stripped of everything except the raw, unfinished truth of a man who had spent his entire adult life standing between vulnerable people and the forces that consumed them, and who understood, viscerally, cellularly, that standing was not enough. That sometimes the forces won. That sometimes the basement door stayed locked because the people with the keys had decided it was more profitable that way. "Ridge, I need to tell you something." The tone shifted. Something in Stone's voice that Ridge had never heard before. Not fear, not anger. Something older. "My name," Stone said. "My real name. Grayson Mercer." Ridge stared at him. The snow fell between them. "Rick Mercer," Stone said, "is my brother." The sentence detonated in the silence. Ridge felt it hit, not in his ears but in his chest, a concussive wave that rearranged everything he thought he understood about the last 6 hours. Stone, president of the Iron Veil, the man who had walked into that diner and built a wall around a child, the man who had called the authorities, mobilized his people, driven through a blizzard to find a girl in a basement. The man who had been standing at the center of this entire operation with the calm, unflinching certainty of someone who would not stop. His brother. "You knew," Ridge said. His voice was a blade. "You knew when I called you." "I knew when you said the name, Jace Holloway. My brother's late wife's maiden name was Holloway. Sarah Holloway Mercer. She died on E44 with her husband Daniel 14 months ago. Daniel was my younger brother." "And Rick?" "My older brother, half-brother. Same father, different mothers. I haven't spoken to him in 11 years. Not since I found out what he was." "What he was?" "A predator. Not the kind that goes after adults, the kind that goes after systems. He worked in insurance for 12 years, estate management, trust administration. He understood how money moved through custody arrangements, how state subsidies were structured, how the gap between oversight and implementation could be exploited. I confronted him in 2015 about irregularities in a family trust. He denied everything. I pushed. He pushed back. He told me if I ever came near his business again, he'd make sure I regretted it. And you walked away." "I walked away." Stone's voice cracked. Not much. A hairline fracture in granite. I walked away because I didn't have proof, because the family courts were his territory, because I was a veteran with a motorcycle club, and he was a clean-cut professional with a finance degree, and I knew that if it came down to my word against his, the world would believe him. Ridge was breathing hard. The cold air burned his lungs. His hands were fists at his sides. "And then your brother and his wife died," Ridge said. "And Rick got the kid. And I didn't know. I didn't know about Jace until tonight. Daniel and I lost contact after the thing with Rick. He chose Rick's side, family." The word came out of Stone's mouth like something that had been lodged in his throat for a decade. And by the time Daniel died, the placement had already been processed through Fitch, through Orr, through the entire machine that Rick had spent years building. By the time I found out my nephew existed, he had already been in that garage for 14 months. Ridge stepped back. One step, two. Not from fear, from the sheer gravitational force of what he was hearing. "The club," Ridge said. "Do they know?" "No." Cruz, Deacon, Harlan, nobody knows. I buried the Mercer name when I founded Iron Veil. I go by Stone. I've gone by Stone for 15 years. Ridge, look at me. Ridge looked. Stone's eyes were wet. Not crying, just wet. The way Stone gets wet in a storm. Not absorbing, not yielding, just holding the water on its surface until gravity takes it. I am telling you this because in the next 48 hours, it's going to come out. Rick's defense attorney will find the connection. The press will find it. And when they do, every single thing the Iron Veil has done tonight will be reframed, not as rescue, as a family dispute, as a vendetta, as a motorcycle club president using his organization to settle a personal score with his own brother. Is that what this is? You know what this is. I know what it looks like. And I know what a defense attorney will say it looks like. And those two things are going to matter more than the truth unless we get ahead of it. That's why I'm telling you now. And that's why from this moment forward, I am stepping back. You're running point. You, Cruz, Harlan, Deacon, everything goes through Vera. Everything goes through the system. My name stays off every document, every call, every interaction. If Jace asks about me, you tell him I'm around but keeping distance for his protection. You don't tell him why. He's your nephew, Stone. And that's exactly why I can't be the one holding his hand when the cameras show up. If I'm in the frame, the story becomes about me. It needs to be about him, about Lily, about Tyler, about every kid in that pipeline. The ambulance siren was gone now. The road was silent. The house behind them glowed like a lantern in the snow, empty and exposed, its secrets carried away on stretchers and in police reports, and in the trembling voice of a caseworker driving through the night toward the only act of courage she had left. Ridge stood in the darkness and felt the weight of everything he now knew settle onto his shoulders like a yoke. Stone's brother, Stone's nephew, Stone's silence. 11 years of distance, and the cost of that distance written in the bones of a 9-year-old boy and the eyes of a 7-year-old girl and the empty file of a 10-year-old who had been erased from the world. "I'll run point," Ridge said. Stone nodded once. "But Stone, when this is over, when the kids are safe and the arrests are made and the cameras are gone, you and Jace are going to sit in a room together and you're going to tell him who you are." Stone looked at the house, at the snow, at the road that led back to the diner where a boy was waiting for someone to come back. "If you'll have me," Stone said. Ridge turned and walked toward the truck. Halfway there, he stopped. He didn't turn around. He spoke into the cold air, loud enough for Stone to hear. He walked 11 miles on a broken leg to find someone who would listen. "He'll have you." He climbed into the truck. He started the engine. He sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel, watching the snow accumulate on the windshield, each flake landing and holding its shape for one perfect instant before the heat from inside melted it into nothing. Then his phone rang again. "Vera Sinclair." He answered. "Ridge." Vera's voice was urgent, stripped of the legal composure that usually defined it. "Darlene Fitch just walked into my office. She's talking. She brought documents. Ridge, the financial records from Ridgeline Asset Partners. They don't just connect to Rick and Orr. There's a fourth name. Someone funding the entire operation. Someone providing the startup capital for every placement, every trust manipulation, every payout. Who? Vera paused. The pause lasted 2 seconds. In those 2 seconds, Ridge heard something in the silence that he had hoped, desperately, irrationally, against all evidence, he would never hear. The fourth name, Vera said, is Deputy Lyle Granger's father, Franklin Granger. He owns Ridgeline Asset Partners. And Ridge, his son, was the first responding officer at the diner tonight, the deputy who almost let Rick walk out with Jace. Ridge's hands went white on the steering wheel. Behind him, in the dark house, Stone stood alone in the snow. Ahead of him, on the road back to the diner, a boy was waiting. And somewhere between them, somewhere in the web of money and silence and locked doors, a 10-year-old named Tyler Briggs existed as nothing more than a closed file and an unanswered question. The engine idled. The snow fell. And the distance between where they were and where they needed to be had never felt longer. Ridge drove through the storm with Vera Sinclair's voice still burning in his ear. Franklin Granger, Ridgeline Asset Partners, the deputy's father, the money man behind every locked door, every forged placement, every child who had been fed into a machine designed to convert human suffering into monthly deposits, and his son, Lyle Granger, badge number whatever, the young deputy with the 2 new uniform and the nervous hand on his belt, had been the first law enforcement officer to respond to the diner, had stood in that room and listened to Rick Mercer's lies and nodded, had nearly handed Jace back. Ridge's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. The truck's headlights carved through the snow, and the wipers beat their rhythm. And beside him in the passenger seat, Cruz sat in silence, reading messages on his phone, his reconstructed face lit blue by the screen. "Harlan's got more," Cruz said. "Ridgeline Asset Partners was incorporated 7 years ago. Franklin Granger is listed as sole proprietor. The company's registered purpose is trust management and estate consulting. On paper, it administers insurance payouts and inheritance funds for minor dependents. On paper. On paper, it's a perfectly legal operation. In practice, Harlan says the money flow is circular. Insurance disbursements and state subsidies go into trust accounts managed by Ridgeline. Ridgeline takes a management fee, 32%, which is about 3 times the industry standard. Then the remaining funds are distributed to the guardian of record for the child's care. Except the care doesn't happen. The care is a mattress in a basement and a gallon jug of water. The guardian pockets the disbursement. Ridgeline keeps the fee. And Judge Orr keeps signing the orders because his campaign war chest has received $67,000 in donations from Ridgeline Asset Partners over the last 5 years. All legal, all documented, all hiding in plain sight. Ridge turned the truck onto Highway 54. The road was worse now. Visibility down to 20 yards, the snow driving horizontally, the truck's tires finding grip and losing it in stuttering intervals. He didn't slow down. "Where's Granger now?" Ridge said. "The deputy." "Still at the diner, with Jace." Ridge's foot found the accelerator. The engine roared. The truck surged forward through the white darkness. "Call Harlan," Ridge said. "Tell him to get Braddock to the diner. Tell him Granger is compromised. Tell him not to let Granger anywhere near that boy." Cruz was already dialing. The diner appeared through the snow 7 minutes later. That same flickering neon. That same tin roof. That same parking lot now buried under 6 inches of fresh accumulation. The motorcycles were white shapes. 2 vehicles sat near the entrance. Granger's cruiser and Harlan's pickup. Inside, through the window, Ridge could see figures moving. Harlan near the counter. Granger standing by the door. And in the back booth, a small shape that could only be Jace. Ridge parked and was out of the truck before the engine fully died. Cruz was beside him. They crossed the parking lot in long strides, boots punching through the crust of snow, breath coming in hard white bursts. Ridge pushed through the diner door. The heat hit him. The smell of old coffee hit him. And Deputy Lyle Granger's face hit him. Young, red, standing 3 feet from the booth where Jace sat, his hand on his radio, his expression carrying something that Ridge now recognized was not nervousness, but calculation. "Granger," Ridge said. The deputy turned. His eyes took in Ridge, took in Cruz, took in the snow on their shoulders and the fury barely contained beneath their skin. "Mr. Callahan, I was just..." Step away from the boy. Granger blinked. Excuse me? Step away from the booth, now. I'm a law enforcement officer. You don't... Your father is Franklin Granger. He owns Ridgeline Asset Partners, the company that manages the trust funds for every child Rick Mercer has been warehousing in basements and garages across southern Missouri. Ridge's voice was not loud. It was the opposite of loud. It was the frequency that a man's voice reaches when volume has been replaced by absolute, unshakable certainty. You responded to a child abuse call tonight involving a man whose financial operation is funded by your family's company, and you almost let that man walk out with the victim. The diner went silent. The waitress behind the counter stopped moving. Harlan lowered his phone. Jace, in the booth, looked up. Granger's face went through 3 transformations in 2 seconds. The first was confusion. Genuine or performed, Ridge couldn't tell. The second was recognition, a flash of something that looked like a man hearing an alarm he'd been expecting. The third was fear. I don't know what you're talking about, Granger said. But his hand had moved from his radio to his belt, and his weight had shifted to the balls of his feet, and his eyes had darted once fast toward the door. Sit down, Ridge said. You can't. Sit. Down. Cruz moved. Not toward Granger, toward the door. He positioned his body between the deputy and the exit with the casual, immovable certainty of a man who had blocked doors in places where the consequences of failure were measured in body counts. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Granger sat. He chose a stool at the counter, his back straight, his hands flat on the surface, his jaw working. Ridge pulled out his phone and called Braddock. 3 rings. Braddock, it's Callahan. Deputy Granger is at the diner. His father is Franklin Granger, owner of Ridgeline Asset Partners, the financial entity behind Rick Mercer's operation. I need you here, and I need someone above Granger's pay grade to deal with what happens next. He hung up before Braddock could respond and turned to Jace. The boy was watching everything. His eyes moved between Ridge and Granger and Cruz with the hypervigilant attention of a child who had learned to read rooms the way other children read books. Constantly, thoroughly, because misreading a room could mean pain. You okay? Ridge asked. Jace nodded. Then he shook his head. Then he looked at his hands. Is Lily okay? He said. She's at the hospital. She's warm. She's safe. She's really small, Jace said. His voice cracked slightly. Smaller than me. I could hear her through the floor sometimes, crying. I wanted to go down there, but the door was locked from his side and from mine, and I couldn't... He stopped, his jaw clenched. He looked at the table. Ridge sat down across from him. He didn't reach for the boy. He didn't touch him. He sat with him, the way he had sat with him hours ago. 2 people on opposite sides of a table. One large and scarred, one small and broken, sharing a silence that meant more than comfort, because comfort was cheap and presence was not. You did enough, Ridge said. Walking out of there. That was enough. I didn't save her. You told us where she was. That saved her. Jace looked at Ridge. In the boy's eyes was something that Ridge recognized. The particular anguish of a person who survived something that others didn't survive intact. The guilt that attaches itself to the living like a barnacle and refuses to let go. Ridge had carried that same guilt out of Helmand Province. He carried it still. Jace, look at me. The boy looked. You carried this alone for a long time. You don't carry it alone anymore. But the next few hours are going to be hard, harder than the walk. People are going to come. They're going to ask questions. Some of them are good people, and some of them might not be, and I need you to trust me to tell you the difference. Can you do that? Yes? Good. Braddock arrived 18 minutes later. He was not alone. A state highway patrol lieutenant named Vasquez came with him. A woman in her 40s with close-cropped silver hair and a voice that sounded like it had been forged in the same furnace as handgun barrels. She entered the diner, assessed the room in 4 seconds, and pointed at Granger. Deputy, outside, now. Granger stood. He looked at Ridge, and in that look was something that surprised Ridge. Not hatred, not defiance, but a kind of hollow recognition. the look of a man who knew the floor had given way and was still calculating how far the fall would be. He went outside with Vasquez. Through the window, Ridge watched the conversation. Vasquez did not raise her voice. She did not touch Granger. She stood in the snow and spoke to him in a low, steady stream, and Granger's body language deteriorated by degrees. The shoulders dropping, the head lowering, the hands that had been at his sides now clasping each other in front of his belt buckle. At one point, he shook his head vigorously. At another, he spread his hands in a gesture of appeal. Vasquez did not move. She stood like a post driven into frozen ground and let him wear himself out against her. Then something changed. Granger stopped talking. His head came up. He looked through the diner window. Not at Ridge, not at the bikers, but at Jace. He stared at the boy for a long time. And whatever he saw in that small face pressed into the corner of a booth at 11 o'clock at night in a snowstorm in the middle of nowhere, whatever that face did to whatever remained of his conscience, it broke something. Granger's shoulders sagged. He reached for his belt. He unclipped his badge and held it out to Vasquez. She took it. Ridge turned away from the window. He didn't need to see the rest. What happened to Granger now was the system's problem. The part of the system that still worked, the Braddocks and the Vasquezes and the Veras who had spent their careers trying to keep the machinery honest while men like Orr and Franklin Granger corroded it from the inside. His phone rang. Vera. Fitch is cooperating fully, Vera said. Her voice was raw from hours of work, but carried beneath it a current of something that Ridge might have called triumph if the subject matter hadn't been so dark. She's given us everything, financial records going back 5 years, internal memos from Ridgeline, correspondence between Rick Mercer and Judge Orr, placement files with falsified home study reports, and Ridge, the Tyler Briggs file. What about it? Fitch says Tyler was removed from Rick Mercer's custody 7 months ago, not returned to family, transferred, to a secondary placement arranged directly by Orr, a group facility outside Branson. The facility is called Lakeview Youth Services. Is it real? It's a registered LLC. It has a mailing address. It filed state licensing paperwork 2 years ago, but Fitch says she's never been there. No caseworker has ever been there. The licensing was approved without an on-site inspection. Who approved it? A state licensing official named Gary Holm, who, as of 3 weeks ago, is no longer employed by the state of Missouri, resigned without notice. Ridge pressed his hand against his forehead. Each new layer revealed another layer beneath it, and beneath that another, and the structure went deeper than anyone had imagined. Not just a corrupt uncle and a compromised judge, but an entire ecosystem of shell companies, falsified documents, complicit officials, and children who existed only as line items in financial spreadsheets. Is Tyler at Lakeview? Ridge said. I don't know. That's what I need to find out. I've requested a warrant. But Ridge, Orr is the family court judge for Barton County. If the warrant request routes through his office, he'll know we're coming. So route it around him. I'm trying. I've reached out to the circuit court in Greene County for an emergency cross-jurisdictional authorization, but it's midnight in a snowstorm and the wheels of justice turn slowly, even when they turn honestly. How long? Hours, maybe dawn. Tyler might not have until dawn. I know. Ridge hung up. He stood in the diner and looked at the clock above the counter. 11:17 p.m. Outside, the snow had not stopped. The world was white and silent and freezing, and somewhere inside it, somewhere behind a door in a facility that might or might not exist, in a building that might or might not contain a 10-year-old boy who had been erased from every record that mattered, time was moving, and they could not move with it. Deacon appeared in the doorway. He had come from the hospital. His face was gray with exhaustion, his medical bag slung over one shoulder, snowflakes melting in his short hair. Lily's stable, Deacon said. Hypothermic. Malnourished. Moderate muscle atrophy in both legs from prolonged confinement. They've got her on IV fluids and warming protocols. She still hasn't spoken more than single words. He paused. The ER doc says the physical injuries are consistent with months of neglect. But it's the psychological presentation that concerned him most. She doesn't startle. She doesn't flinch. She doesn't react to sudden noises or movements. She's adapted to her environment so completely that the absence of threat doesn't register as safety. It registers as a different kind of threat. Ridge absorbed this. He filed it in the same place where he filed everything that was too large to process in the moment. A compartment somewhere behind his sternum that was filling fast and would eventually need to be opened, but not now. Not tonight. Deacon, I need you to do something. Name it. Lakeview Youth Services, outside Branson. It's a registered facility. It might have a third child, Tyler Briggs, age 10. We can't get a warrant until morning. We can't send police without a warrant, but we can send someone to look. Deacon studied Ridge's face. Look, not enter. Look. Drive by. Check the exterior. See if lights are on. See if vehicles are present. See if the place looks like an active facility or a shell. And if I see something that suggests a child is in danger, then you call 911 and you call me. In that order. Deacon nodded. He didn't hesitate. He didn't weigh risks or calculate consequences. He shouldered his bag, turned, and walked back out into the snow. 30 seconds later, the sound of his truck engine growled to life and faded east. Ridge returned to the booth. Jace had fallen asleep. Not really asleep. The shallow, twitching half-sleep of a body that had been running on fear and adrenaline for so long that the absence of immediate threat triggered a shutdown, not rest. His head was against the wall. His mouth was slightly open. His hands, even in sleep, were curled into loose fists. Harlan sat across from the boy, his phone face down on the table, his eyes on the door. He looked up when Ridge approached. "Stone called," Harlan said quietly. "He's staying at the Mercer house. Braddock has it taped as a crime scene. Stone's sitting in his truck in the driveway." "Alone?" "Alone." Ridge thought about Stone, Grayson Mercer, sitting in a pickup truck outside his brother's house in the snow, staring at the building where his nephew had been locked in a garage for 14 months, and a 7-year-old girl had been sealed in a basement, and he had known none of it. 11 years of distance, 11 years of telling himself that walking away was the right call. And now the cost of that distance laid out in crime scene tape and hospital admission forms, and the sleeping face of a boy who shared his blood. The hours crawled. Midnight passed, then 1, then 2. The snow slowed. The clouds began to thin. The waitress, who had never left, who had stayed through all of it without being asked, refilling coffee cups and clearing plates and bearing witness in the quiet, stubborn way that ordinary people sometimes bear witness when they finally decide to stop looking away, brought Ridge a sandwich he hadn't ordered and a cup of coffee he hadn't asked for. He ate the sandwich. He drank the coffee. He watched the boy sleep. At 2:47 a.m., Deacon called. "I'm outside Lakeview." His voice was low, careful, the voice of a man speaking from a parked vehicle in the dark. "It's a single-story commercial building off Route 76, half a mile from the highway. Used to be a medical clinic from the look of it. No signage. No vehicles. Parking lot overgrown. Lights are off." "Is it abandoned?" "The exterior looks abandoned, but Ridge, there's heat. I can see condensation on the windows, and there's a utility meter on the east wall that's active. Someone is paying to keep the power on in a building that looks like it's been closed for years." Ridge's heart was beating hard enough to feel in his throat. "Can you see inside?" "Negative. Windows are blacked out, painted or covered from the inside." "Stay there. Don't approach. I'm calling Vera." He called. Vera answered on the first ring. She had not slept. "Lakeview is active," Ridge said. "Blacked out windows, heat running, no vehicles, no signage. Deacon is on site." "The warrant," Vera said. "I just got it. Greene County judge signed it 12 minutes ago. Emergency cross-jurisdictional. I'm dispatching State Patrol and Taney County Sheriff's units to the location now." "How long?" "They're mobilizing 20 minutes, maybe 30. "Vera, I know, 20 minutes. Ridge hung up. He called Deacon back. "Units inbound. 20 minutes. Stay outside. Do not go in." "Copy." Silence. The diner hummed. The clock ticked. Jace shifted in his sleep, a small sound escaping his lip. Not a word, just a vibration, the residue of a dream or a memory or the echo of footsteps above a basement ceiling. 17 minutes passed. Deacon called. "Ridge!" His voice was different, tight, compressed to a frequency that Ridge recognized from field communications. The frequency that means the situation has changed, and the change is not good. Someone just pulled up, SUV, dark color, no plates. They're going to the building. They have a key. How many? One person, male, heavy build. He's inside now. Deacon, do not. Ridge, a light just came on in the back of the building, and I can hear. Deacon stopped. The silence on the line lasted 3 seconds. I can hear a child screaming. Ridge was on his feet. The stool behind him scraped across the floor. Harlan looked up. Jace's eyes flew open. Deacon, call 911. Now. Give them the location. Then get to that door. Ridge, you said, I know what I said. There is a child screaming in that building and a man with no plates who showed up at 3 a.m. You are a combat medic. You have a legal obligation to render aid. Get to that door. The line went dead. Ridge's hand was shaking, not from cold, not from fear. From the specific tremor that comes when a man's body prepares for action and there is no action to take, when the distance between where he stands and where he needs to be is measured in miles and every second of that distance is a second that a child is screaming. He called Vera. Someone entered Lakeview. Unknown male. No plates. Deacon heard a child screaming. He's going in. Where are the units? 8 minutes out. Tell them to run hot. Lights and sirens. Full emergency. He hung up. He stood in the middle of the diner with his phone in his hand and his heart in his throat and every muscle in his body locked, because there was nothing he could do except wait. And waiting was the one thing he had never learned to do. Not in Afghanistan, not in the VA hospitals, not in the years of drifting, not in the Iron Veil. He had learned to fight and to ride and to endure and to stand between danger and the people behind him, but he had never learned to stand still while someone else did the standing. Jace was watching him. The boy was fully awake now, sitting upright in the booth, his eyes wide and dark, and reading Ridge's face with that terrible precision that abused children develop. The ability to decode an adult's emotional state from the smallest signals because their survival once depended on it. Something's wrong, Jace said. We found another kid. Maybe. We're getting him out. Tyler? Ridge looked at the boy. You know about Tyler? I heard the name on my uncle's phone. He said Tyler was handled. I didn't know what that meant. Ridge crossed to the booth and crouched so his eyes were level with Jace's. Listen to me. There are good people on their way to that building right now. A friend of mine is already there. We're going to get Tyler out. What if you can't? The question hit Ridge in the chest. Not because it was sophisticated, but because it was honest. The pure, unfiltered honesty of a child who had spent 14 months learning that the world did not always produce the outcome you hoped for, that doors stayed locked and casts stayed on, and adults who said they would come back did not always come back. Then we'll keep trying until we can, Ridge said. That's what we do. That's all we do. We keep trying. His phone rang. Deacon. I'm inside. Deacon was breathing hard. His voice echoed slightly, the acoustics of a large empty space. The front section is gutted. Empty rooms, stripped fixtures. But there's a corridor in the back, locked door. I kicked it. It's open. The child. I found him. He's here. Male, approximately 10 years old. He's Ridge. He's chained to a bed frame, padlocked chain around his ankle. The man who came in. He's gone. Must have heard me at the front door and went out the back. I didn't see him. I'm with the boy now. Is he hurt? He's terrified. He's thin. The chain is worn through the skin around his ankle, but he's conscious. He's verbal. He asked me if I was here to take him back to the judge. Ridge closed his eyes. The judge. A 10-year-old boy chained to a bed frame asking if the man who just kicked down the door was there to take him back to the judge. The architecture of this horror had rooms within rooms within rooms, and each door opened onto something worse than the last. Stay with him. Units are minutes out. Do not move him until medics arrive. The chain. I'm not leaving him, Ridge. I know you're not. Sirens. Faint. Growing. Deacon heard them too. They're here, Deacon said. I can see lights. Ridge exhaled. The breath came out of him in a long, ragged stream that fogged the air and dissipated and left him feeling empty in a way that was not weakness but release, the specific emptiness that comes when the worst thing you imagine turns out to be real and you survive the knowing of it. He stayed on the line. He heard the sirens arrive, he heard doors slam, and voices shout, and boots on concrete, and the specific careful sound of bolt cutters working through chain links. He heard Deacon's voice, low and steady, talking to the boy the way a man talks to someone he is pulling from wreckage, not with promises, but with presence, not with hope, but with the stubborn, unreasonable refusal to let go. And then he heard something that broke him. A boy's voice, small, rough from disuse, cracking on every other syllable. "Are you real? Are you actually real?" "Yeah, buddy," Deacon said. "I'm real." "Are you going to lock the door again?" "No, nobody is ever going to lock that door again." Ridge set the phone down on the counter. He turned his back to the room. He pressed both hands flat against the wall, and he bent his head, and he breathed. And the breathing turned into something else. Not crying, because Ridge Callahan had not cried since Helmand Province, and the machinery that produced tears had been damaged in the same explosion that scarred his face. But something moved through him, something seismic, something that rearranged the geology of his chest and left new formations in its wake. Behind him, Jace's voice, quiet, certain. "You found him." Ridge turned. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. He looked at the boy. "Yeah," he said. "We found him." Jace nodded. Once. A single solemn movement that contained within it more dignity than any gesture Ridge had seen from any adult in any situation in his entire life. The nod of a 9-year-old who understood that the world had done its worst and that people he had met only hours ago had responded with their best, and that the distance between those two things was the space in which everything that mattered existed. Ridge's phone buzzed, a text from Vera. "Warrants issued for Rick Mercer, Judge Raymond Orr, Franklin Granger. FBI field office in Springfield has been notified. Federal investigation opened under child trafficking and financial fraud statutes. Rick Mercer located by State Patrol 30 minutes ago. He was parked at Pine Bluff Motor Lodge, room 117, shredding documents. He's in custody. Orr is being picked up at his residence now." Ridge read the message twice. He set the phone on the table where Jace could see it. "Your uncle's in custody," Ridge said. "He can't hurt you. He can't hurt anyone." Jace looked at the phone. He read the words slowly, his lips moving. When he finished, he looked up at Ridge, and in his eyes was something that Ridge had not seen there before. Not hope, not relief, but a vacancy where fear had been. As if an enormous structure that had occupied the center of his mind for 14 months had suddenly been removed, and the space it left behind was vast and echoing and not yet filled with anything else. "What happens now?" Jace said. Ridge sat down across from him. The diner was quiet. The clock read 3:34 a.m. The snow had stopped. Through the window, the first suggestion of a break in the clouds allowed a single faint star to appear in the western sky. "Now," Ridge said, "we start fixing things." The door opened, cold air, boot steps on linoleum. Stone walked in. He was covered in snow, his jacket dark with melt, his face raw from hours in the cold. He stood in the doorway and looked at Jace, and Jace looked at him, and the space between them was charged with something that neither of them could name. The pull of blood recognizing blood across a room, across years of silence, across every failure and every locked door and every mile of frozen highway. Stone didn't speak. He walked to the booth. He stood at the edge. He looked down at the boy. Jace looked up at him. And Stone, Grayson Mercer, president of the Iron Veil, veteran, widower, a man who had spent 15 years burying his own name because the name came with a brother whose cruelty was bottomless, did the only thing left to do. He sat down. He put his scarred hands flat on the table, and he waited. Because the next move belonged to the boy. It had always belonged to the boy. From the moment Jace walked 11 miles on a broken leg to a diner full of strangers, the direction of this story had been his to determine. Not the bikers, not the systems, not the brotherhoods, the boys. Jace studied Stone's face for a long time, the scars, the gray in his beard. The eyes that were the same shade of gray as Ridge's but carried a different weight. The weight of a secret that was pressing against the inside of Stone's chest like a fist against a closed door. "You look like my dad," Jay said softly. Stone's breath caught, a sound no one else heard, a private detonation contained entirely within the walls of one man's chest. "You knew him," Jay said, not a question. "Yeah," Stone said. His voice was barely a whisper. "I knew him." The star outside the window brightened as the clouds continued to thin. Dawn was still hours away. But somewhere between the darkness of what had happened and the light of what was coming, in a diner on a frozen highway in the middle of Missouri, a boy and a man sat across from each other and began the long, uncertain work of finding out whether the word family could mean something other than pain. And 12 miles east, in a county holding facility, Rick Mercer sat in an interview room with his wrists cuffed to a table and his mask finally, permanently, irrevocably removed. Staring at a wall and understanding for the first time that the boy he had locked in a garage had done what no investigator, no social worker, no court, and no system had managed to do in 14 months. He had walked out. The dawn came slow over Barton County. Not the clean, golden dawn of postcards and movie endings, but a Missouri winter dawn. Gray, reluctant, the sun pushing through cloud cover like a fist through wet cloth, casting pale light across a landscape buried in 6 inches of fresh snow. The highway was quiet. The plows hadn't come yet. The world looked like something that had been erased overnight and was only now beginning to be redrawn, tentatively, in shades of white and pewter and the faintest blush of cold pink along the eastern ridge. Inside Hatchet Creek Diner, Jace Holloway was asleep. Not the twitching half-sleep of a body on alert, but something deeper, something that had finally surrendered to exhaustion so completely that his small frame had gone slack against the booth's vinyl back, his head tilted to one side, his mouth slightly open, his hands, for the first time in hours, unclenched. The filthy cast on his left leg rested on the seat beside him, elevated on a folded jacket that Deacon had placed there before leaving for Branson. The cast would come off today. The leg beneath it would need surgery, rehabilitation, months of care. But the cast would come off. Stone sat across from him. He had not moved since sitting down 3 hours ago. His hands were still flat on the table, his eyes still on the boy's face, and the coffee the waitress had brought him at 4 a.m. sat untouched and cold beside his left hand. He was watching Jace breathe. That was all. Just watching the small, rhythmic rise and fall of a chest that he had not known existed until 12 hours ago, attached to a boy who carried half of his brother Daniel's face and all of his dead sister-in-law's stubborn, quiet courage. Ridge stood at the counter. He was on his 4th coffee. His body ached in places that had nothing to do with physical injury. The deep, cellular ache of a nervous system that had been running at combat frequency for 8 hours straight and was now slowly, painfully downshifting. His hands were wrapped around the mug, absorbing heat. His eyes were on the window, where the first gray light was turning the parking lot from a dark blur into a field of white interrupted by the dark shapes of motorcycles still buried under snow. His phone had not stopped buzzing since 4 a.m. Vera Sinclair. Harlan, Braddock, State Patrol, the FBI field office in Springfield. The machinery of justice, once engaged, moved with its own momentum, and the momentum was building. The facts, as they had assembled themselves through the night, were these. Rick Mercer had been arrested at the Pine Bluff Motor Lodge at 1:14 a.m., found in room 117 with a shredder, 3 boxes of financial documents, and a laptop that he had attempted to wipe. The laptop's hard drive was recoverable. Forensic technicians were already working on it. Judge Raymond Orr had been arrested at his home in Barton at 2:40 a.m. He had answered the door in a bathrobe and slippers and had said nothing, not a single word, from the moment the handcuffs closed around his wrists to the moment the cruiser door shut behind him. His silence was not the silence of a man exercising his rights. It was the silence of a man who had been expecting this knock for years and had simply run out of performances. Franklin Granger had not been at his listed residence. His wife, reached by phone, said he had left for a business trip 2 days ago. She did not know where. State and federal agencies were now looking. Deputy Lyle Granger had been placed on administrative leave. His badge and weapon had been surrendered to Lieutenant Vasquez. He was cooperating. He claimed he had not known the full scope of his father's operation. Whether that was true would be determined by investigators who were better equipped than Ridge to separate ignorance from complicity. Darlene Fitch was in protective custody at the Circuit Attorney's office in Springfield. Her daughter had been picked up from a relative's home by state police and was safe. Darlene's cooperation was being formalized into a plea agreement that would acknowledge her role in the placement fraud while recognizing the coercion under which she had operated. She would likely face charges. She would also likely provide the testimony that would dismantle every layer of the operation. Tyler Briggs, age 10, had been transported by ambulance from the Lakeview facility to a hospital in Branson. His injuries were severe. The chain around his ankle had worn through skin and into tissue. He was dehydrated, malnourished, and had not been outside in approximately 7 months. But he was alive. He was free of the chain. And when Deacon had carried him out of the building and into the cold night air, Tyler had looked up at the sky, at the stars now visible through the thinning clouds, and had said nothing, because there were no words in any language for what it felt like to see the sky again after 7 months of sealing. The man who had entered Lakeview before Deacon, the one who had fled through the back, had been identified through vehicle registration as Gary Holm, the former state licensing official who had approved Lakeview's paperwork without an inspection. He was found 4 hours later parked at a gas station in Hollister, asleep in the driver's seat with the engine running and an empty bottle of bourbon on the passenger floor. He was arrested without incident. He would later tell investigators that he had gone to Lakeview that night to move Tyler to a new location because Rick Mercer had called him in a panic. He had heard Deacon break through the front door and had run. When asked why he hadn't simply released the boy himself, he stared at the table for a long time and said, "I didn't have the key to the chain. Only the judge had the key. Only the judge had the key." Ridge had heard that sentence from Vera at 5 a.m. and had set the phone down and walked outside and stood in the snow for 10 minutes, breathing cold air until the thing inside his chest that wanted to scream had settled back into something he could carry. Now it was 6:15. The diner was warm. The waitress, whose name Ridge had learned during the long night was Carol, was making a fresh pot of coffee and heating up the grill for breakfast. She had refused to close. She had refused to go home. When Ridge had tried to pay the tab at 3 a.m., she had looked at him with an expression that was equal parts exhaustion and fury, and said, "That boy ate a bowl of soup in my restaurant, and I almost didn't serve him. You don't owe me money. I owe him an apology." The apology was in the coffee she kept brewing, in the grill she kept heating, in the simple, stubborn act of keeping the lights on and the door open for a room full of bikers and a sleeping child while the world outside dealt with the consequences of what had been uncovered. At 6:30, Jace woke up. It was not a gradual awakening. It was instant, the way animals wake, from 0 to full alertness in the space between one heartbeat and the next. His eyes opened. He saw Stone. He saw the diner. He saw the gray light outside. And then something passed over his face that Ridge watched from the counter with the attention of a man who understood that this moment, the first waking moment after the worst night of a child's life, would determine something essential about the trajectory of everything that followed. Jace looked confused, then afraid. Then, slowly, carefully, the way a person touches a surface to test whether it's hot, he looked at Stone's face, and the fear receded. Not disappeared, receded. Like a tide pulling back from a shore, leaving wet sand and debris, but also revealing ground that had been underwater for a very long time. "You stayed," Jace said. "Yeah," Stone said. "All night?" "All night." Jace looked at the untouched coffee. He looked at Stone's hands, still flat on the table, still exactly where they had been when he fell asleep. "You didn't have to." "I know." The boy was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You knew my dad." Stone's throat moved, a swallow that took effort. "He was my brother." Jace didn't react the way Ridge expected. There was no shock, no tears, no explosion of emotion. Instead, the boy studied Stone's face with that same precise, evaluating attention he had used all night. The attention of a child who had learned that information was survival and that every new fact had to be weighed and tested before it could be trusted. That makes you my uncle too, Jace said. It does. But you're not like him. No. How do I know that? Stone leaned back. He removed his hands from the table and set them in his lap, creating space, relinquishing the small territorial claim that flat hands on a surface represent. He looked at Jace with eyes that held nothing back. No performance, no mask, no carefully constructed version of himself designed to win a child's trust. Just the raw, unfinished face of a man who had made a terrible mistake 11 years ago and had been living with it ever since. You don't, Stone said. You don't know that. Not yet. Knowing takes time. But here's what I can tell you. I walked away from your dad 11 years ago because I was trying to protect myself from Rick's world. And by walking away, I left a door open that your dad walked through, and that door led to Rick getting custody of you when your parents died. I cannot change that. I will carry that for the rest of my life. But I can tell you that I am here now, and that I will be here tomorrow, and the day after that. And you can test that as many times as you need to until you decide whether it's true. Jace absorbed this. He looked at Ridge, who was still at the counter. Ridge gave no signal, no nod, no encouragement. This was not his decision to influence. Okay, Jace said. Not yes. Not I trust you, just okay. The word of a boy who was leaving a door open because someone had taught him, in the space of a single night, that not every open door led to pain. Carol brought breakfast. Eggs, toast, bacon, orange juice for Jace. She set the plate down, and this time she looked at the boy. Really looked, the way she should have looked 12 hours ago when he walked through her door. And her eyes were bright, and her jaw was tight, and she said, You eat as much as you want, sweetheart. There's more where that came from. Jace ate. Not the desperate mechanical intake of the night before, but something slower, more deliberate. The eating of a person who was just beginning, to believe that there would be another meal after this one. At 7:15, Michelle Delacroix returned. She had slept 2 hours in her car. Her eyes were ringed with shadow, but her voice was clear, and her leather folder was thick with new paperwork. Emergency protective custody has been granted, she told Ridge and Stone. She said it formally, the way a person says something that has legal weight. For all 3 children, Jace Holloway, Lily Chen, Tyler Briggs. Their wards of the state effective immediately. Rick Mercer's guardianship has been terminated. The court order was signed by a Greene County judge, bypassing Barton County entirely. And long term? Ridge asked. That's where it gets complicated. The immediate priority is medical care and psychological evaluation. Jace needs surgery on that leg. Lily and Tyler both need extended medical treatment. After that, the state will begin looking at permanent placement options. Family members, if any, can be identified and vetted. Foster care, if not. Stone spoke. I'm family. Michelle looked at him. I know, your relationship to the children will be part of the assessment. But, Mr. Mercer, Grayson, you need to understand that your connection to Rick Mercer will be scrutinized, heavily. The defense will argue conflict of interest. The court will require a full background investigation. I understand. And the motorcycle club, that will be a factor. The motorcycle club is the reason those children are alive today. I know that, but the court doesn't see what happened in this diner last night. The court sees a file, and the file needs to be clean. Stone nodded. He didn't argue. He didn't push. He sat with the reality of it the way he sat with everything, solid, patient, willing to endure the process, because the alternative to process was the chaos that had allowed Rick to operate in the first place. The morning unfolded in stages. Braddock came by at 8 to collect statements. He sat with Ridge for 40 minutes, recording everything on a handheld device, asking precise questions in his slow, deliberate way. When he was done, he shook Ridge's hand, a firm, wordless grip that communicated something that neither man would have been comfortable saying out loud. Harlan came in at 8:30 with a laptop and a folder of printed documents. He spread them on the counter and walked Ridge through what the night's investigation had uncovered. The Ridgeline Asset Partners financial records, obtained through Darlene Fitch, showed a total of 11 children processed through the scheme over 5 years. Of those 11, 6 had been successfully returned to legitimate family placements after Fitch's initial paperwork. 2, Lily, and Jace, had been found last night. Tyler made 3. The remaining 2 were older teenagers who had aged out of the system and could not be located. Harlan was still looking. The financial scope was staggering. Over $2 million had moved through Ridgeline's accounts. Insurance payouts, trust disbursements, state and federal care subsidies, and of that amount, less than 15% had been spent on the actual care of the children. The rest had been divided between Rick Mercer, Franklin Granger, Judge Orr, and a constellation of smaller payments to individuals who had greased various bureaucratic wheels along the way. They ran it like a business, Harlan said. He said it without inflection, the way a man says something that he finds so deeply repugnant that adding emotion to it would be redundant. Intake, processing, management, profit distribution. The children were inventory. Ridge looked at the numbers. He looked at the names. He looked at the web of transactions that connected a sitting judge to a trust manager, to a county social worker, to a licensing official, to a man who locked children in basements and garages and chained them to bed frames. He looked at all of it, and he felt something settle inside him that he recognized from the aftermath of combat. The cold, clear understanding that the world contained systems of cruelty, so organized and so efficient that fighting them required not just courage, but patience, not just anger, but architecture. Make copies of everything, Ridge said. 1 set for Vera, 1 set for the FBI, 1 set for us. Already done. At 9 o'clock, Ridge drove Jace to Barton County General Hospital. The drive was quiet. The roads had been plowed, but the shoulders were still buried, and the bare trees along Highway 54 stood like skeletal sentries against a sky that was slowly, grudgingly, turning from gray to pale blue. Jace sat in the passenger seat with his hands in his lap, watching the landscape pass with an expression that Ridge couldn't quite read. Not peace, not anxiety, but something in between. The expression of a person who is traveling through a world that looks the same as it did yesterday, but has been fundamentally altered by what they now know about it. At the hospital, they cut off the cast. Jace lay on an examination table in a room that smelled like antiseptic and institutional soap, and a technician used an oscillating saw to slice through 4 months of plaster, while a nurse held Jace's hand and Ridge stood by the door with his arms crossed and his jaw clenched. The sound of the saw was high and thin, and plaster dust floated in the overhead light, and when the 2 halves of the cast fell away, the leg beneath was revealed. It was thin, pale to the point of translucency. The skin was macerated in places where moisture had been trapped, and there were sores, raw, red, open, along the shin and ankle where the cast's crumbling edges had rubbed against flesh for months. The fracture site, visible as a slight angulation below the knee, had not healed correctly. The bone had set in a misalignment that would require surgical correction. But the leg was free. Jace looked at it. He looked at the pale, damaged limb that had carried him 11 miles through a snowstorm, and his face did something that Ridge had not seen it do before. It crumpled. Not into tears. Jace didn't cry. Not yet. That would come later, in safer moments, in rooms with softer light, but into a contraction of muscles that was the physical equivalent of a door being unlocked from the inside, a releasing of pressure that had been building for so long that the release itself was painful. Ridge stepped forward. He didn't think about it. He didn't calculate it. He crossed the room and put his hand on the boy's shoulder. Just his hand. Just the weight of it. Scarred knuckles against the thin fabric of a hospital gown. And Jace leaned into it the way a structure leans into a buttress, not collapsing but transferring weight, allowing someone else to hold a portion of what he had been carrying alone. They stayed like that for a long time. The nurse looked away. The technician gathered the pieces of the cast and disposed of them. The overhead light hummed, and in the silence something began, not healing, because healing is a word that implies an endpoint, and what Jace Holloway faced had no endpoint, only a direction. But something began. A turning. A first step on a road that would be long and uneven and sometimes dark, but that led eventually, incrementally, away from the garage and towards something else. The surgery was scheduled for 2 days later. In the meantime, Jace was admitted for observation, nutrition, and the slow, careful process of being assessed by people whose job it was to understand what 14 months of isolation and abuse had done to a 9-year-old's mind and body. A child psychologist named Dr. Adama Osei spent 2 hours with Jace on the first day. She emerged from the session with a face that was carefully neutral and eyes that were not. "He's remarkably articulate," she told Ridge in the hallway, "and remarkably guarded. He processes information like an adult, analyzing, evaluating, testing for consistency. That's a survival adaptation. It served him well. But it's going to make trust very difficult, very slow." "How slow?" "Months, maybe years. He's going to test every relationship. He's going to push back against kindness because kindness has been used as a tool to manipulate him. He's going to have nightmares. He's going to have episodes of withdrawal. And he's going to need people who are willing to stay through all of it without expecting gratitude or progress on a timeline." "I'll stay," Ridge said. Dr. Osei looked at him. She studied his face the way she studied everyone's face, with professional attention, reading the micro-expressions, the tells, the involuntary signals that revealed what the words didn't. "You've been through your own version of this," she said. Not a question. "Different version, same neighborhood. Then you know it doesn't end. It changes shape. It gets quieter. But it doesn't end." "I know." She nodded. "Good. He needs someone who knows." The weeks that followed were not a montage. They were not a sequence of uplifting moments set to music. They were slow, difficult, unglamorous, and punctuated by setbacks that felt like failures, but were actually the normal, jagged trajectory of a child learning to live in a world that had given him no reason to trust it. Jace's surgery went well. The bone was realigned, pinned, and recasted in a proper orthopedic boot. Physical therapy began 10 days later. It hurt. Jace did not complain. He clenched his jaw and did the exercises and limped down the hospital corridor with the determination that the physical therapist described as frankly intimidating for a 9-year-old. Lily Chen was transferred to a children's hospital in Springfield with a specialist pediatric unit. Her recovery was slower, more complicated. She had been confined for so long that her legs had partially atrophied, and the process of rebuilding muscle required daily therapy that she endured with a silence that her caregivers found heartbreaking. But she was eating. She was sleeping without the light on, a milestone that her nurse noted with quiet triumph. And one afternoon, 3 weeks after her rescue, she spoke a full sentence to a therapy dog named Walter, who had been brought to her room as part of the hospital's animal-assisted program. The sentence was, "You're warm." The handler cried. Lily did not notice. Tyler Briggs was the hardest case. The chain had caused an infection that required 2 rounds of intravenous antibiotics. His psychological assessment revealed a level of trauma that placed him in the highest category of care need. He did not speak for the first 4 days. When he did begin speaking, his first sustained conversation was with Deacon, who had returned to the hospital in Branson every day since the rescue, sitting in a chair beside Tyler's bed for hours at a time, sometimes talking, sometimes reading, sometimes just being there. Tyler told Deacon about the room at Lakeview, the bed frame, the chain, the window that had been painted black, the visits from the man with the key who brought food and water on a schedule that Tyler had learned to predict by the sounds outside the building. He told Deacon about the day he was taken from Rick Mercer's custody and driven to Lakeview by a man he didn't recognize. He told Deacon about the 7 months in that room, about the slow erosion of time into a substance without shape or direction, about the moment when he stopped counting the days because the counting had become more painful than the not knowing. Deacon listened to all of it. He did not flinch. He did not look away. He sat with the weight of it the way stone sat with weight, absorbing, holding, refusing to let the person carrying it carry it alone. The legal proceedings unfolded with the grinding inevitability of institutional machinery. Rick Mercer was charged with 11 counts of child abuse and neglect, 7 counts of financial fraud, 3 counts of false imprisonment, and 2 federal counts of wire fraud related to the interstate movement of trust funds. His bail was denied. Judge Raymond Orr was charged with corruption, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Franklin Granger was located 11 days after the night at the diner in a motel in Little Rock, Arkansas, with $37,000 in cash and a one-way ticket to Belize. He was arrested by FBI agents and extradited to Missouri. Gary Holm, the licensing official, cooperated immediately and fully, providing testimony that connected every node of the operation. Darlene Fitch testified before a grand jury. Her testimony lasted 6 hours. She described the photographs of her daughter. She described the judge's chambers. She described the slow, suffocating process of signing documents she knew were false while telling herself that compliance was the only way to keep her child safe. The grand jury returned indictments on all defendants. Darlene's plea agreement resulted in a suspended sentence, community service, and the permanent loss of her social work license. She accepted all of it without argument. She had not yet spoken to Jace, and she did not know if she ever would. But she had walked through Vera Sinclair's door on a snowy night and told the truth, and the truth had done what truths do when they are finally released. It had moved through the system like a current through water, carrying everything in its path toward the surface. Ridge did what he said he would do. He showed up. Not every day. He was not a saint, and sainthood was not what Jace needed. He showed up on surgery day. He showed up for the first physical therapy session and the third and the seventh. He showed up for the court hearing where Jace's protective custody was formalized. He showed up on a Tuesday afternoon for no reason at all, carrying a bag of cheeseburgers from a place off Route 54, and sat with Jace in his hospital room while they ate and watched a movie on the mounted television and said almost nothing, because sometimes presence is a language that requires no vocabulary. Stone showed up too. Carefully. Slowly. With the measured patience of a man approaching a wild animal. Not because Jace was wild, but because Stone understood that the distance between them was not measured in feet, but in years, in failures, in a name that the boy had learned to associate with locked doors and cold garages. Stone visited twice a week. He brought books, not children's books, but books about motorcycles, about engines, about how things worked. Jace read them. He asked questions. The questions were technical at first. How does a carburetor work? What's the difference between a V-twin and an inline four? But they gradually shifted into something else. Questions about Daniel, about what Stone's brother had been like as a kid, about whether Daniel had liked motorcycles too. He hated them, Stone said one afternoon, sitting in the hospital room with a cup of coffee and a half-smile that Ridge had never seen before. Your dad was the only Mercer who thought two wheels were one too few. He drove a Volvo station wagon. Safest car on the road. Jace almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. School resumed in February. A tutor came to the hospital first, then to the group home where Jace was placed temporarily while the court sorted through the long-term custody evaluation. He was behind. A year and a half of missed school had left gaps that would take years to fill. But he was smart. Not just intelligent, but observant, analytical, with a capacity for pattern recognition that his teachers found remarkable and his psychologist found predictable. Survival sharpens certain kinds of cognition. The brain adapts to threat by becoming hyperattentive to detail. The trick, Dr. Osei explained, was helping Jace redirect that hyperattention from danger to learning without triggering the alarm systems that had kept him alive. The nightmares continued. They would continue for a long time. Some nights, Jace woke in the dark and didn't know where he was, and his body flooded with the old chemicals. Cortisol and adrenaline, and the deep mammalian conviction that the door was locked and no one was coming. On those nights, he sat in his bed and breathed the way Dr. Osei had taught him. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, and waited for his heart to slow and the room to stop spinning, and the walls to stop looking like the walls of a garage. But the nightmares were no longer the only thing. There were other things now. The sound of Ridge's truck pulling into the parking lot, the weight of a book in his hands, the particular quality of light in the physical therapy room at 10 in the morning, the voice of a tutor explaining fractions with a patience that felt genuine, the face of Stone, his uncle, his actual uncle, the one who hadn't locked any doors, sitting across a table with coffee and stories about a father Jace was beginning to remember not as a ghost, but as a person. On an afternoon in late March, 6 weeks after the surgery, Jace walked out of the group home under his own power. No cast, no boot, a slight limp that the therapist said would diminish with time and exercise. He crossed the parking lot to where Ridge was leaning against his truck, arms crossed, leather jacket creased and worn, the scar on his face catching the late afternoon sun. Behind Ridge, in the parking lot, 14 motorcycles gleamed in a row. Stone was there. Cruz, Deacon, Harlan, and others, Men and women of the Iron Veil who had never met Jace, but who had come because someone in their brotherhood had stood between a child and a locked door, and that was reason enough to show up on a Tuesday afternoon and make a parking lot look like a wall. Jace stopped at the edge of the sidewalk. He looked at the motorcycles. He looked at the riders. He looked at Ridge. "What's this?" he said. "Your physical therapist cleared you for short rides," Ridge said. "Thought you might want to see what the world looks like from the back of a Harley." Jace stood very still. The breeze moved through the parking lot, carrying the smell of exhaust and leather and the first green edge of a Missouri spring. The sky was blue. The air was warm. The winter was over. "I've never been on a motorcycle," Jace said. "I know. Is it scary?" Ridge looked at the boy. At the limp that was fading, at the hands that no longer shook, at the face that was still too thin but was filling slowly, recovering the geography of childhood that had been eroded by 14 months of darkness. "A little," Ridge said. "The good kind." Jace crossed the parking lot. He stopped in front of Ridge's bike, a black Harley Road King, heavy and scarred and idling with a low, steady rumble that vibrated through the asphalt and up through the soles of Jace's sneakers. Ridge handed him a helmet. Jace put it on. It was too big. It sat low on his forehead and made his face look even smaller. Ridge climbed on. He held out his hand. Jace took it. He swung his leg over the seat and settled behind Ridge, his small hands gripping the sides of the leather jacket, his feet finding the passenger pegs. The engine vibrated through both of them, a shared frequency, a mechanical heartbeat that connected the man and the boy through 60 pounds of steel and chrome and the particular kind of trust that is built not through words, but through the simple act of holding on. Ridge pulled out of the parking lot. Behind him, 13 motorcycles followed. They rode east on Highway 54 through the town of Harlan, past the feed store and the post office and the shuttered gas station, past the gravel road that led to the house where everything had happened, past the Hatchet Creek Diner where a flickering neon sign still buzzed against the afternoon sky. Jace turned his head as they passed the diner. He looked at it through the visor of the oversized helmet, and Ridge felt the boy's grip tighten for 1 second, then loosen. They rode for 40 minutes, not fast, not far, just through the Missouri countryside, through the rolling timber and the open farmland and the small towns that dotted Highway 54 like beads on a string. The air was cold but not bitter. The sun was low and gold. The shadow of the motorcycles stretched long across the asphalt, a procession of dark shapes moving through a landscape that was coming back to life after a long, hard winter. When they returned to the group home, Jace climbed off the bike and removed the helmet and stood in the parking lot with his face flushed and his hair wild and his eyes carrying something that had not been there before, not happiness exactly, not yet, but the space where happiness might eventually go. A vacancy that was no longer shaped like fear. Ridge killed the engine. The silence after a Harley shuts down is its own sound. A ringing absence, the ghost of vibration still humming in the bones. "Ridge," Jace said. "Yeah." "At the diner, that first night. Why did you let me sit at your table?" Ridge looked at the boy. He remembered the moment. The small figure at the edge of the booth, the shaking hands, the voice barely louder than a whisper. "Can I sit here until my leg stops shaking?" "Because you asked," Ridge said. Jace nodded. He looked at the row of motorcycles, at the riders dismounting, at Stone walking toward them across the parking lot with his hands in his jacket pockets, and his face carrying an expression that was not quite a smile but was closer to one than anything Ridge had ever seen on it. "That's the whole reason?" Jace said. "That's the whole reason." Jace turned and walked toward the group home entrance. His limp was barely visible now. His shoulders were straight. At the door, he stopped and looked back. "I'm going to ask for a lot more things," he said. Ridge felt something move in his chest. Not the cracking that had happened in the Mercer house, standing against the concrete wall. Something else. Something quieter. A settling. The sound a foundation makes when the weight it was built to carry finally arrives. "Good," Ridge said. "That's how it works." Jace went inside. The door closed behind him. The evening light softened across the parking lot, turning the chrome of the motorcycles to gold. Stone reached Ridge and stood beside him. The two men looked at the closed door, and in the silence between them, between two wounded veterans who had found each other in the wreckage of a war that never really ended, was something that did not need to be spoken, because speaking it would have made it smaller than it was. They stood there until the sun dropped below the ridgeline and the first stars appeared above the Ozarks, faint and far away but steady. The way things are steady when they have been burning for a very long time and intend to keep burning for a very long time more. Then Ridge put on his helmet, and Stone put on his. And one by one, the Iron Veils started their engines and rode west into the gathering dark, the sound of their machines fading slowly down Highway 54 until there was nothing left but the evening air and the quiet parking lot and the light in a window where a boy who had walked 11 miles on a broken leg was sitting down to dinner with people who would not lock the door.